It's a great analogy, what happened in baseball to what's happening in the housing market. Because the issue was that old school baseball scouts, they would actually look at Billy Beane, who was a player back in the day drafted by the Mets, and he was what they called the jeans model player. 6'3", built, 5-tool player, could throw, could run, could hit, but he actually wasn't that good.
Yeah.
Like when you look at the production and all of that, and what the data,
He looked the part.
he looked the part,
but he wasn't the part.
in the way that maybe the Austin, Texas housing market looks the part of a housing market that's going to boom forever.
Little foreshadowing.
Right. The housing market's in a similar stage in America right now, in the early 2000s, as the baseball was in the early 2000s, where we're just now starting to see data on the U.S. housing market in a more kind of like fundamental, educated way of looking at it, which is what I'm trying to provide at Reventure Consulting. So to bring Austin into the picture. So this was a boomtown housing market, not just during the pandemic, but before the pandemic. And the narrative on Austin goes, there are so many people moving to Austin, therefore it's just going to boom forever. That's just kind of like where the argument starts and stops for many real estate investors and realtors. The question I want to ask was, well, how many people actually are moving to Austin?
Hey, what's going on? Welcome to the Jess Marshall podcast. If you're not concerned that the housing bubble is about to burst, you should be. It is, and I'm here to help with that today. I've got Nick Gerli, owner, operator, founder of Reventure Consulting on the podcast. We are going to discuss a wide array of data and indicators which have got some very, very serious things that need to be addressed. Stay tuned. I think you'll enjoy. So you grew up in New York. What part of New York?
Yeah, I grew up in a town called Bronxville, just outside of New York City in Westchester County.
Okay.
And then when I was 13, we moved upstate New York near Albany.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
My dad grew up in Wappingers Falls, so right, Poughkeepsie area.
Yeah, it's funny. Moved down to Texas 2 years ago. I keep running into people actually from New York and upstate New York.
You have you don't have the New York accent,
Yeah, I don't think I ever did.
Really?
My dad maybe did slightly because he grew up in Yonkers, but fortunately, I think I never actually picked up a big accent.
One of my attorneys is from upstate and just said in his opinion, it's the most beautiful area in the world that he's
Hudson
ever
Valley.
seen.
Yeah, my mom still lives there actually, near Albany, and she lives in the Hudson Valley. And every time I go back and visit, it's something I didn't appreciate when I grew up there, because we grew up in the middle of nowhere. Where she lives is like a house on over 30 acres, right? And so I was an only child. It was boring. But now I go back there and I really appreciate it, because you're right on the Hudson River. You see all the hills and the mountains. You just got to make sure that you're there for the 3 months out of the year when it's warm.
One of my favorite movies, not a lot of the actual movie was actually shot there, but Last of the Mohicans set in that, obviously in that general area. Most of that was shot actually in the Table Rock Mountains in North Carolina, in the Blue Ridge. Yeah, all those waterfalls and everything, but it's beautiful up there nonetheless.
Yeah, I've never seen that movie. I've heard it's long.
It's Daniel Day-Lewis, man. Madeline Stowe. I think it's a classic. I think more than anything, as a movie, I love movies. It's the soundtrack, man. The score is there's not been many. I'm a big epic feature guy. So like Braveheart, Gladiator, probably some of my favorites. Last of the Mohicans. I mean, I'm still I still like Fight Club and stuff like bro stuff.
You want like more
Pulp
of like
Fiction,
a deep story. And...
I want. Well, let's set it up in the beginning so we can get some good revenge at the end.
Yeah, I love that.
I don't know. Yeah, I'm a very Old Testament type of guy. If you know what I'm saying.
Yeah,
so great. You should check it out.
I think I'll add it to the list. I'm coming with. I want to see the new Top Gun first.
New Top Gun. I heard that Northman. With Nicole Kidman and Alexander Skarsgård's pretty good as well. I haven't seen many great. I keep wanting to find a good movie, and it doesn't seem like there are any. And then I get drawn into some series.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Like
and
Peaky Blinders.
I know, and it's back out, and I'm waiting because that's my jam right there.
Yeah, I love it too.
Nick, can you just lower that mic just a little bit lower on the arm?
It might be real stiff because Is that better? Okay. You can edit that out just so my armpit isn't on the air, isn't on the internet, but do whatever.
Put a censor bar over it.
Yeah, I quit giving a damn a long time ago. Peaky Blinders is next level, man.
Yeah, it really is. That's like right in the wheelhouse for me because I love mob, crime, whether it's like U.S., like Casino or movies like that.
So Ray Liotta passing hit you hard the couple weeks ago. Then
actually, to be honest, I didn't hear that.
Really?
Yeah.
Right, the beginning of Goodfellas though, like there's nothing better.
No,
I always knew I wanted to be a gangster.
He wasn't that old.
No, I actually think he was better in Blow as Johnny Depp's dad. Did you see him in that?
I didn't.
Man, maybe I shouldn't watch as many movies as I watch.
Yeah, no, I think I should watch more. It's a bit. I'm the bottleneck here. I gotta add to my list.
Ray, great actor, man, awesome actor.
Yeah.
It's too bad you got to take care of yourself. I think he smoked almost his entire life, and it's not gonna cut it.
I'm sure like a lot of these like super rich elite Hollywood people,
they get new lungs or whatever.
Well, yeah, or they do a lot of things that damage their bodies. I don't know whether it's like drinking or drugs or whatever.
Or throw wine bottles at each other and cut their fingers off or just whatever. Yeah, boy, it's been a couple of weeks of nonsense there. I like the mob stuff. The Peaky Blinders I was all in on, and I had no idea Tom Hardy showed up, and I was like, I'm all in.
Tom Hardy is the best, and what makes Peaky Blinders great is the side characters.
Absolutely,
Tom Hardy's character, and then Adrian Brody's character.
Absolutely,
that's what really pushes the series over.
Yes.
Because I've always loved Cillian Murphy. Going back to like 28 Days Later, so he's great, but yeah, it's the side characters of like.
Yeah, he's great in Batman too. The Christian Bale Batman, wasn't he in Cillian Murphy's in the
he was
first or the second one?
He was in Scarecrow, his first one.
Yeah, man. Tom Hardy is one of my favorites. So they pulled that out of left field, and that was before. I try not to read anything about it because I don't want anybody to ruin spoilers. So when that showed up, I was like, what? All right, well, now we're cooking with.
I want to watch it too, but the thing I got to do is I canceled my Netflix. So I tried to pare down my subscription, so I have to get Netflix back, or I have to borrow someone's. But now they're putting a stop to that.
Yes, they are putting a stop to that. Or you could just get since you went to the London school, just get a BBC feed, because that's where Peaky Blinders came out.
Right.
It was out 6 months ago. Oh, and then Netflix had a deal to wait. So I've been like, come on, where are we at? So the over immersion of apps is out of control.
It's crazy. Like, I wonder at some point, when are we just going to go back to having cable? Because
it's easier.
Because it seems like we're going to get to that stage because we have, I don't know, Peacock and Hulu and Apple TV and Netflix,
YouTube
and Showtime,
TV,
YouTube TV,
HBO Max.
It's
all the Prime stuff.
Whatever company takes the lead and says we're just going to do a bundled service
for $100,
and then we're going to throw in 50 channels from cable.
Yeah,
that's going to just become what everyone gets.
No doubt.
So it's funny because there's like an economic force like over the long run of like disaggregation, right? And you're seeing that where we went from like in cable, 3 big cable companies, that's all everyone watches. Now we have like 1 million streaming services. So it disaggregated, but eventually it's going to go back to maybe not all the way, but some type of happy medium. And that's actually kind of a trend that happens in the economy more broadly. And a lot of it relates to interest rates. When interest rates get low, like they've been over the last 15 years due to the Federal Reserve, doing quantitative easing and printing money, it makes it very easy for any new company to like get into a new space, which is why you then have all these competitors. But now that we're entering like a higher inflation, higher interest rate scenario, that's basically going to eliminate all the companies that aren't profitable. And then the ones that are going to buy the ones that get eliminated. And so then that's how you move back more towards having only a couple players instead of all the players.
So everyone's kind of pushing their chips to the middle because it's an arms race to see who can get there first.
Yes.
Like King of the Mountain, and whoever does takes the whole mountain type deal.
Like, let's lose money.
Yeah.
Netflix lost money for a really long time. Now they make money, although they borrow so much in debt to finance their profits. But they basically won that arms race because they just got ahead of everyone else. So you're right, and I think a lot of these other streaming apps, and you could make this comparison with like tech companies or even real estate companies, right?
Wow.
Like you have Zillow, you have Redfin, you have Opendoor, you have all of these tech startups. Zillow is probably the one that got ahead of everyone, and they're gonna last. Some of these other real estate tech companies, who knows if they can survive the current economic environment. So it's interesting how it's like a broader trend. You could see it in something like streaming apps. You can see it in something like real estate.
And we were obviously connected by a mutual friend, but you've got this very admirable passion for observing data and finding patterns. Where's that? I'm not that type of guy. So when I listen to one of your videos, I'm like, whoa, pause, rewind. What did he really?
Yeah.
No kidding. Amazing. Awesome value add on every video of yours I've watched. And I can't say that to every YouTube person that I have on here.
Sure.
Where did that passion for analyzing data come from? Were you just like way into math as a kid or?
I was never really into math per se, but I was always kind of a nerd. Like I always loved sports, like the New York Yankees, New York Giants, New Jersey Devils were my favorite sports teams. And I always loved analyzing statistics. Like you open up the paper, back in the day, right?
Yeah,
and you look at the box score and like, did Tino Martinez get a hit? Or, did
Tino, man.
Tino Martinez, remember him? Or did
absolutely.
Patrick Elliott score a goal? And that I always loved data and numbers and trying to assess like, were these players good or bad? And that's just been building and building throughout my whole life. And I was an economics major in college.
Where'd you go to college?
So I went to the London School of Economics as well as Siena College. So I split time between the two. Siena's in upstate New York. LSE is obviously in London.
Isn't Siena where that's where Rick Pitino got his start, or is that where he's coaching now?
I don't know.
I think he might.
We had when I was there throughout like the duration, there was the basketball teams were amazing. Siena made the NCAA championship or not Final Four.
At least
March Madness.
Yeah, at least the big
three of the
dance.
4 years of my like total duration there.
Wow.
From start to finish. So but yeah, I was always a data nerd. And so I was an economics major. And then I got a job in real estate out of college. And I worked for a real estate company in Boston called UC Funds, which is a bridge lending company. And we would make loans on, commercial real estate properties like apartment buildings and hotels and office buildings. Some of them would already be built. Others would be under construction. And I was an underwriter there, helping to figure out, like, do we want to do this deal? Is this market a good market? Is this city a good city? Is this borrower that we're giving money to going to pay us back? That's how I kind of started melding my like nerd mentality with real estate. And that was a great job for a long time. But eventually I became obsessed, not with just like doing real estate deals, but understanding fundamentally, like if I looked at a deal in Dallas for an apartment building, or I looked at a deal in Corpus Christi, which, were markets we did in. Why was Dallas a better market than Corpus Christi? Like people would say, oh, because Dallas has better job growth and whatever. But I wanted to answer like the question, why?
With
data.
With facts backed by data, not with opinions.
Exactly. Because, there's all these platitudes about, the economy and migration in the housing market. And a lot of them are accurate and true, but rarely do people try to stop and ask the question like why and validate whether it's accurate. So I left that company and I started Reventure Consulting, which is a real estate data consulting company. And I originally started Reventure as a way to sell data and market reports to real estate investors so they could figure out in 2020 and 2021 the best cities to buy real estate in based on the underlying fundamentals, which are things like job growth, wage growth, home building relative to migration, and trying to understand all these things. And then sometime around late 2020, early 2021, I started saying, hey, let me put some of these videos on YouTube of this data. And that's when the YouTube thing just completely blew up.
And that has to be, your delivery is excellent. It really is.
Appreciate that.
You're just flawless. But the main reason why that blew up has to be because you're distilling all this grain down into a perfect shot glass of, 50 proof.
Exactly. So right. It's amazing. The US housing market is a $30 trillion asset market, yet it's so poorly understood, which is amazing. It's the biggest asset market in America, even bigger than the stock market. Yet, like the stock market is something people really seem to understand well. They look at the company financials, they look at the revenue and the future growth, and like they value it. And outside of some bubbles that occur, like it seems like there's more technical understanding of the stock market. The housing market seems to be kind of in the Stone Ages. Like, to draw an analogy, I don't know if you ever saw the movie Moneyball or read the book Billy Beane and the Oakland Athletics.
100%.
They introduced
Brad Pitt, bro.
Brad Pitt, great movie, right?
Absolutely.
They
Jonah Hill. Yeah.
Jonah Hill,
Mhm.
and that one of his first kind of like more
Kind of,
serious roles.
Great
after
movie.
Super bad. But that talked about how in baseball they transitioned in the late 90s, early 2000s from just using kind of like high level platitude, you know, oh, this player is good or bad, to like, well, what does the data say?
And instincts.
And
Right, because a lot of the old school guys are like, well, I mean, I got a feel for this guy. He doesn't hustle.
Exactly.
Like, no, let's look at the data
That's right.
and decide.
Right.
And that goes against a lot of the old school guys still rail against that stuff.
That's
actually.
right. And so it actually it's a great analogy. What happened in baseball to what's happening in the housing market, because the issue was that old school baseball scouts, they would actually look at Billy Beane, who was a player back in the day drafted by the Mets, and he was what they called the jeans model player. 6'3", built, 5-tool player, could throw, could run, could hit, but he actually wasn't that good.
Yeah.
Like when you look at the production and all of that, and what the
He
data,
looked the part,
he looked the part,
but he wasn't the part.
in the way that maybe the Austin, Texas housing market looks the part of a housing market that's going to boom forever.
A little foreshadowing.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Or the U.S. housing market looks the part of a
Oh, God.
market that's going to boom forever. But then, you know, what they realize is, no, he's actually not that good. And the data actually says that there's a player like Scott Hatterberg or Chad Bradford, who they're kind of like frumpy. You know, Chad Bradford's like a sidewinder pitcher. Scott Hatterberg's a little overweight. Like the traditional scout would never think, oh, that's the best player. But the stats said, well, he takes a lot of walks. He adds a lot of value. He gets on base. He scores runs. And so that was a shift that happened in baseball in the early 2000s. And now every baseball team, for the most part, uses data. The housing market's in a similar stage in America right now in the early 2000s, as the baseball was in the early 2000s, where we're just now starting to see data on the US housing market in a more kind of like fundamental educated way of looking at it, which is what I'm trying to provide at Reventure Consulting. So to bring Austin into the picture. So this was a boomtown housing market, not just during the pandemic, but before the pandemic. And the narrative on Austin goes, there are so many people moving to Austin, therefore it's just going to boom forever. That's just kind of like where the argument starts and stops for many real estate investors and realtors. The question I want to ask was, well, how many people actually are moving to Austin? Let's look at that over 30 years of job growth and migration, and then compare that to 30 years of data on how many homes and apartments were built, and then look at the surplus and deficit year by year, and then correlate that to how home prices have grown in Austin over the last 30 years. And only then can we start to make some educated determinations about, well, actually, are so many people moving to Austin right now more than they were in the past? Or is it roughly the same amount of people? Was there kind of a short-term bump during the pandemic, and the home builders are now building way more homes, and prices are at a point now where people are starting to leave Austin? And that's how you get the characterization that I have of Austin as the biggest housing bubble in America right now, that I think is going to go down 35 to 40%.
And it's followed, it's number one, and it's followed, what's number two?
Boise, Idaho would be number 2.
And number 3 is Salt Lake
City.
And number 4 is Seattle.
Seattle and Phoenix, I would throw in there as well. Basically, the biggest housing bubbles in America right now are a lot of the places that for the last 10 years, people were like, you need to buy in.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a couple things going on. The first thing is when the home prices get so high above what the local wages are, it tends to really like destabilize the market, and is a sign of a bubble. Because, I mean, to be able to afford a house, you need to make the money to afford the house.
Right.
I mean, technically speaking, right? To get a loan.
Yeah. How do you get the loan without being able to prove your funds, right?
Exactly. So
Yeah.
if you push the prices and then the mortgage rates up, which is happening now at the same time, it creates a situation where in 1 year, the typical cost of a mortgage payment has gone up 65% in America, while the wages have gone up 6%.
Run that back. Whoa.
All right, so let's go back a little further to the middle of the beginning of the pandemic, mid 2020.
Right.
So that's when the rates really plummeted, the mortgage rates, right? And home prices were still cheap back then. And so the typical cost of a monthly mortgage payment in America for a new home buyer was around $1,100 a month in August 2020. $1,100 a month on average. So that includes like Seattle, but also includes like Iowa. Today, that payment is $2,100 a month. So in the span of 18 to 20 months, it's doubled due to the prices going up, which will just increase the payment, and then the mortgage rates now surging. So it's like a double whammy for the home buyer in terms of affordability. And in the same span, wages have only gone up around 10 to 11%.
And you haven't even brought in to your discussion what's going on in terms of inflation. So if wages have gone up XYZ, you got all this inflation coming out of nowhere. Although I don't know how anyone's getting free money thinking it's not gonna not be free, but a lot of people thought that. We're talking about some serious, the light at the end of the tunnel is not the end of the tunnel, it's a train.
That's right.
Coming right
That's
at
right.
you.
And I'm so glad you brought up inflation, because inflation in the housing market is a very interesting relationship, because the traditional understanding of inflation is what? It's like, oh, inflation, most people think pushes up home values, right? Because it did in the 1970s.
Sure.
That was the big thing. 1970s was a decade of inflation, and the housing market did well during that inflation. But there's another side to it. It's actually not inflation that pushes up home values. It's wages and income that pushes up home values. And so what happened in the 1970s is that, yes, we had crazy inflation, but the wage and the income gains were absurd. It was like 7, 8, 9%, 10% income growth per year. People in the 70s were saving over 10% of their income each year. So actually back then, people had a lot of money. The situation with the inflation today is, yes, we have raging inflation, the worst in 40 years. People, when you back out the government stimulus checks, which artificially inflated the economy, they don't have the same type of savings and money they did in the 70s, actually. And so this is where the inflation today could actually be a big negative for the housing market, because it could just mean like higher gas prices mean people have less money to spend and are going to feel less inclined to want to make a big purchase. And, you know, we have all these headwinds in the economy more broadly right now that are also painting a picture of potentially a recession, which is another topic entirely.
It is. You use the term headwinds a lot. What does that mean? So when our viewers go start to consume your content, which I highly recommend, what do you mean when you say headwinds?
Sure.
How do you define that? What's that?
So I would think of it in terms of the U.S. consumer and the average American household, right? So inflation and higher gas prices is a headwind for the economy. It pushes down on the economy because it's going to reduce consumer spending into the economy. You know, people have 5% wage growth and then a fixed budget kind of on what they can afford to spend. If gas prices double, they're going to have to spend less, which is going to ultimately hurt the economy and hurt the housing market. That's a headwind.
So in the same way, if you got a tailwind coming in from upstate New York to Dallas, you might get here 30 minutes early.
Yeah.
If you're flying into a headwind, you might get here 30 minutes late. Early's always better than late.
That's right.
Same deal. Into a headwind is never a positive.
No, I love you connecting that analogy with the airplane, because it's really good. Into the headwind is just everything's more difficult. You're expending more energy, you're spending more money to get the same or worse results.
Exactly. It's very concerning, especially because, you know, there have been quite a few people who think they've made some good money in real estate over the last 18 to 24, 5 months. Although I don't know what the market looked like around the country, but here I had a couple flips going as COVID reared its planned or fake or real head. Who knows? Anyone who says that they really do know is lying. They really weren't actually making that money, because then they're taking the profits, especially if you're a real estate investor, you're taking those profits and you're going to try to buy new prospective properties. And now those are artificially inflated. They're not actually worth what the demand is saying that they're worth. And so it's fool's gold.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. And this is not to say that a lot of people haven't made money in real estate. A lot of people have made money in real estate. I would say the ones who made the real money made it before the pandemic or owned before the pandemic. I think, we had a big surge in real estate investors in 2021 buying. We went from, according to CoreLogic, 800,000 homes purchased by an investor in 2020 to 1.4 million purchased by an investor in 2021. Wow. So you have all these investors kind of coming in at the top of the market, which is meaning that a lot of these investors are going to get burned. And if you kind of look back at the history of investor participation in the housing market, at least institutional, like the big Wall Street banks, it's pretty new. But when the big Wall Street banks initially started getting in, it was at the bottom in 2012 after the last housing crash. After prices had already went down, that's when the smart money investors said, let's buy the foreclosures. No one wants to touch it. Prices are cheap. That's the time to get in. And, more generally, it's also the psychology of investment, right? Like if everyone is like in a frothy way being like, let's get in, it's always going to go up, that's probably a sign to take it easy. And then now people are seeing the housing markets enter the downturn. There's going to be a point in the next couple of years where the psychology is going to flip. We're going to go through another housing crash. And then all the people today who are saying you got to buy are going to be saying, don't buy. But ironically, that's when you do want to buy.
Is the reason why, like 10 minutes ago, you said analytics with regard to the housing market are only now becoming a thing because you can go invest in the stock market? And if you're going to do that, you can day trade and do all that if you want. But the average working Joe, by and large, doesn't have time for that. They have a financial advisor. That advisor says, hey, let's put you in this package. Let's diversify your risk, blah, blah, blah. If you're, I want to quit my job and I want to be Chip and Jojo, and I want to flip houses. You can take some online courses. You might even have a mentor, work for a guy who's flipping houses, but maybe he's old school and he's like, I know this neighborhood, I got a feel for it, I've had great luck here. And so there just hasn't been this pattern put forward of let's really look at the numbers like there would be maybe if you're investing in securities, let's say, or I don't know, natural resources.
Yeah, you're right.
Is that why?
You're right. It's only relatively new that real estate's getting institutionalized, which, to be honest, like has negatives to it. And actually, I would say this, you're talking about the person, the home flipper who has the feel for the neighborhood and has the contacts and knows the right people and might be a contractor like yourself. They are in a much better position to make money by real estate investing and home flipping, because real estate is still local. And so this is actually where, using the data meets using the instincts and the existing knowledge. Where I think people get into trouble is when they try to scale, like let's say a home flipping operation, like a company like Opendoor, they're a national home flipper. They don't have any specific expertise in any of these markets. They're trying to buy all these homes and hire all these people across America at once, and they're overpaying for assets. That's how people get into trouble. Additionally, I talked to a lot of people during the pandemic from, say, California, and a lot of people from California moved to Texas, but some people stayed in California and just bought investment properties in Texas. Like they worked for a tech company, used their tech bonus in 2020 and 2021 and bought an investment property. A lot of those people are going to get in trouble as well because they bought into something that they don't know. And so I think it's important to marry the data, that I present also with like local knowledge, and knowing the right people, which I'm sure you're familiar with being a contractor and having flipped homes.
Well, 100%. Actually, you reached out to me and said, hey man, can you hook me up with a handyman, right? Moving into your new posh place. And I was like, well, that's a little different right now. And it's been in quite some time. And I ended up having to recommend a couple apps. Hopefully you're able to get your big screen.
I can't remember the name of it. I used the
Thumbtack,
Thumbtack, yeah.
Was it, or TaskRabbit? I like TaskRabbit better.
Thumbtack.
But
it was great. Basically, I needed a TV hung up and then just on an app, and they came and they did it.
Yeah, and that does help a lot of people make a living. It is kind of turning the small business into the Uber driver type guy where he's not got as much take home, but maybe he doesn't have to average. I digress. We get off on construction and all that forever until you're bored to tears. It's just interesting that that the numbers haven't come into play, because the numbers that you presented in terms of the overall market, the housing market has on that pie is large. And so for it not to be a trending thing to review all data, is that just because no one thought? I mean, when you started Reventure, did you look around and go, no one's doing this? Or were you like, oh, there's a few people doing it, I can do it better? What was that market like when you started?
Yeah, that's a great question. I never really thought about whether there was a market need for it. I just thought about it. I'm just so interested.
This is what I want to do. That's awesome.
My mission was to just understand the U.S. housing market better than anyone else. And I think you're correct. There's not a lot of people who understand it. Like when I basically learned the basics of what I know, I had to go to economists. I had to read economic papers. Robert Shiller was like a famous economist. He's like the godfather of understanding the housing market. Enrico Moretti wrote a book called The New Geography of Jobs, talking about how and why people move around America. These were the things that gave me the foundation of understanding how to look at the housing market, because you are right. It's not out there for the most part. And there are some tech companies that give people data at a very micro level to help them make better investment decisions. But here's the overall problem in real estate, is that it's a sell side industry where, you know, the narrative is controlled by realtors and investors who are looking to make a quick profit.
Yeah.
That's the ultimate problem. So even if you present, and you know, this is what I found when I was trying to sell my data to real estate investors, which was a more fundamental type of data. A lot of them, you know, weren't that interested, because all they wanted to do was, like, they knew that there was capital that wanted to invest in Austin. So they just kind of hitched to that train, and they didn't want to hear an argument or a data saying Austin wasn't a good place to invest.
Because by the time anybody figures it out, I will have hit a rip, or I will have made some money and I'll be good, and then I can go figure something else out. Is that what's going on here?
I think potentially,
because I don't want to be too precious about business ethics, right?
Yeah.
If there's supply, it needs demand, and if there's demand, it needs supply. But I agree with you in that my experience with realtors is that they're trained a lot more how to connect and how to mirror body language and how to get that haircut than they are to be like, look, I've reviewed the data. Don't reckon I've ever heard that from a realtor, to be quite honest. Let me run comps. And then I sold this over here, over there. By the time you turn around, I mean, I'm sure that there's some borderline or there have been some unethical dealings in terms of you give a little old lady some bad advice because you know she needs to move and you're just trying to hit
to make the fee. I mean, it's such a fee-based business. Right. You know, the realtor earns the fee on the closing, but what a lot of people don't realize is on the investment side, it's a fee-based business. So I think a lot of people make the mistake of thinking the big Wall Street investor that's buying homes is doing it because they want to is doing it for the rental income. They're not doing it for the rental income. And I know this from my background working in institutional real estate.
What are they doing it for?
They do it because, for instance, when a private equity fund raises a fund to go buy single family homes, or when a hedge fund does that to go buy single family homes, say they raise a $500 million or $1 billion fund, they're going to get a bank to come in and leverage it. They're going to put in some equity, and they're going to find some other equity that's not their own. Everyone is earning fees on that when it closes, particularly the people putting the deal together. They earn fees when the fund closes. They earn fees every time they purchase deals. And so real estate is a fee-based business, which is ultimately what I think drives a lot of the insanity in the housing market, because then there's all this pressure from everyone to justify, you know, the fee for all. We used to call it my old company, the fee for all. And then, you know, when the narrative develops, it tends to be very strong, right? And, you know, you look at the narrative of three big narratives in the housing market that a lot of investors use to justify buying are: we have a shortage of housing in America that's never going to be fixed. We're 5 million short, so I'm going to buy because prices are going to go up. There's another narrative that inflation is going to push home prices up forever. And there's another narrative about buying in the Sun Belt, which is that people are moving to the Sun Belt in a way that they never have, and that's going to continue. And so those are potentially compelling narratives, right? That you could get you to believe like this is a good idea. So it's not as if I don't think a lot of, you know, real estate investors are intentionally misleading. I think they just are so susceptible into buying into those narratives because they want to earn the fee. and they want to kind of put the money out. And so they're going to tell themselves what they need to tell themselves. But on each of those three things, when I look into the data, I realize there's some truth to each of them, but ultimately they don't support what we're seeing in this housing market.
The fee for all, yeah, it's certainly a problem with the industry. It is what it is, though. I don't even see how blockchain can eliminate title companies, although that's what a lot of people think will happen. I don't see how you're going to get around the real estate agent explaining real estate contract and the way things work to a first-time home buyer who has no idea even what an option period is. Why is that? Because when you're in high school or college, no one teaches you anything about how to manage your money, how to buy a house. You need to set up credit. You need to be a co-signer with your parents when you're sick. They don't teach you that. Why? Because they want to turn you into a foot soldier. We all know that. This isn't a political podcast today. It's just troubling. I have made this mistake. I'm usually pretty open about the mistakes I've made in business because I'm pretty self-taught. I've just always been a hard driver. So if I go look at 50 houses to buy and I bid on 40, and I'm a flipper, and I'm like, I got to get my guys moving here. Like, let's go. We can't sit at home and watch reruns of Judge Judy all day. Like, we got stuff to do, right? Then I'm gonna, and I'd have, be like, I don't necessarily love the numbers here, but we need a deal. And so as a real estate investor, I'm seeing things for what I want them to be, not for what they really are. The oldest axiom that I ever learned in real estate is you don't make money in real estate when you sell. You make it
when you buy.
Yeah. And that's tough. And then if you're in a rush because you have a new job and you got to get somewhere and you're like, look, we have 3 days to find a house. So there's a lot of factors.
Yeah, of course. And I think the way it's set up is fine, right? Like, this is kind of the way it is, like you're saying. And, I'm not going to badmouth realtors. They serve an important purpose. And I think real estate investors and flippers also serve a purpose. But, where the problem comes in is like, so this is just kind of the American psyche almost of like, let's do it. Let's get the deal done.
Yep.
That's the American spirit, which I think is a good
Always
spirit.
Be closing, Nick. Coffee is for closers, Nick.
Yeah. And I honestly think that's a good fundamental way to look at it. The problem comes in is when you combine that American spirit of like capitalism and, capitalism is great. But then when the Federal Reserve comes in and then artificially lowers interest rates, and then when the government pumps stimulus money into the economy, well, then you have a problem, because it's almost like you got like a hyper kid and then you give them like 3 Red Bulls. It's like that hyper kid needs like the right boundaries. The Federal Reserve and the federal government over the last 2 to 3 years have just kind of spiked the punch bowl, so to speak, is the expression. And that's when you end up with problems.
Yeah, but not with booze, like with meth, heroin, cocaine, all at the same time.
Yeah, you can say that.
It's so irresponsible too, because we're all raised, unless you're raised in certain households. Oh, that, yep, you can believe what they're saying. You can, yes, Alan Greenspan, what's he going to say? I'm a little older than you.
Oh yeah, he was in some ways, Greenspan was like the guy who got the ball rolling on a lot of this. It was kind of benign at first, right? It was like,
it always is.
We're going to cut interest rates. I think it was like the dot-com.
You know how you boil a frog? You don't throw it in boiling water. You just turn up the temperature very slowly. And so, of course, it was benign to begin with. It's let's throw it out there and see what the reaction is. And if it's, oh, yeah, you're gonna drop interest rates so I can get into a house that I can't afford. I need a man cave. Let's make it happen. And before you know it, we're completely upside down.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah.
To take a free market and then have such an effector on it as the Federal Reserve, people just don't realize what. I don't think that the average Joe walking around understands that when interest rates are manipulated and are artificially lowered, whether it's, to get someone reelected or to boost the economy artificially, what that does, it's artificial never works.
It's like death from 1,000 cuts, right? Like, I think you made a good point. It's slow, and for a free market to work, the key in the free market is the price signal. What do things cost? That is so essential to have an accurate price signal in the free market. And when the Fed does these things like you're talking about, it skews the price signal. So if you look at this during the pandemic, right, like the Fed dropped interest rates and mortgage rates went to 2.8%, which is like, oh, it's cheaper than renting. Let's buy. Then we pumped stimulus into the economy. People were able to pay their rent when they maybe should have had to move in with neighbors. So that increased rent. Investors are saying, let's buy. All these temporary things skewed the price signal up. So prices and rents went way up. And so then the investors are looking at it like, oh, okay, let's go. The home builders are looking at it like, let's turn on the spigot. Right now in America, there are 2 million homes and apartments either actively under construction or permitted and ready to get going. That is an all-time high. That is even higher than it was in 2006 at the peak of the last bubble. Some of that's related to delays in construction due to labor shortages and material shortages. But right now we have 2 million homes actively under construction just as housing demand is plummeting. So,
well, they're just going to give them away for free to everybody coming up from over that southern border. They got to live somewhere. So
I've seen
you want a free
like
house?
That.
There you go, man. It's troubling that you do have a free market that is in no way, shape, or form a free market.
Right.
Essentially, there are people, puppet masters, pulling strings, and you. It's not even a conspiracy theory to say this. The data backs that up. Is this a fixable problem? That's a really.
I'm an optimist. I think it is. And, a lot of people are skeptical right now of the Federal Reserve and Jerome Powell. But I think finally, it took too long, but finally the Federal Reserve is doing what they need to do to combat inflation. And I think we should view that positively, right? They're finally trying to return some normalcy into the market. That's, and I'm hopeful that continues. Because I think one thing that people underestimate is that America is still the strongest democracy in the world. And people hate inflation in America. Like, people hate inflation way more than unemployment in America. And that has filtered through to the president, and that has filtered through to the Federal Reserve, which is why our Federal Reserve is now acting, although too late, they are now acting to combat inflation. There are other countries in the world right now, that are not doing that in the same way. The EU hasn't raised interest rates yet. There's more of a mentality in other countries like, you're just going to have to deal with it. And so this is my optimistic take, is that I still think the American people have the power to influence things. And I think a lot of the people who expected the Fed to just like cut rates and print money again as soon as things got tough, they weren't counting on the fact the American people hate inflation. And this is still a strong democracy. And I'm optimistic that people hate inflation enough that we're going to course correct and get the Fed acting more like they need to act.
Okay.
And, that's my optimistic take.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people are skeptical of that, but.
Well, I know there's a lot of people who live in fear, and that's one of the topics of this show is I gravitate toward those who do not. Because when the pandemic came out, there was just unbridled. I mean, it was quite obvious what was happening. And so then to see people continue to operate the same way, if not harder, I'm not afraid. We're going hard. So I'm optimistic as well, because I think there's enough fearless people.
I agree.
I just don't think they're all on the internet. So people don't think there's a bunch of us. Yeah. And there's a bunch of us. Yeah. And we're going, okay, all right, let's see what you got. And we can fix it. So let me ask you a couple things. When you came in, I asked you something that I meant to save, and then you stopped and said, let's discuss this. So I've heard this stat. Swipe, maybe you can pull this up while I ask Nick this. I have heard that in the last 20 to 22 months is the largest in terms of volume of humanity single migration of people on the North American continent of all time. And I don't know if I picked that up on some subreddit thread or whatever. Lots of people moving. Why? Lots of opinions there. Most of those opinions are politically based. have that many people been moving since the virus
Yeah.
thing broke out?
Well,
They have.
this is something where I think there's two separate things which are true. So it's true to say that there was a big surge in people, homeowners, especially moving, like people looking to move and buy a house. There was a surge in that. Data from Redfin confirms way more people were looking to change cities and metro areas who were searching for a house. It was a lot of wealthy people moved during the pandemic, especially for the reasons you described, like moving for political reasons. I don't want to be part of lockdowns or whatever the reason was, warm weather, affordability. A lot of people did move during the pandemic, especially those who are higher earners did. That is true. However, what is also true is that way fewer people moved over the last 2 years to the Sun Belt in America than in 05-06 at the peak of the previous housing bubble. Like if you go into Phoenix, 05-06, 2 times as many people were moving to Phoenix back then as they did the last 2 years.
Really?
Yeah.
What was the driver then? Because that was actually going to be my next question. What's different? Obviously, we can all think about some crazy things that have been different in the last 2 years than were happening in 06, 07, 08. 06, 07, 08, I'm probably, again, oversimplifying, was, in my opinion, a lot of irresponsible lending,
Sure.
a lot of greed, a lot of, you can't afford it, but we'll put in an adjustable rate on this and you're good. Nothing down.
Talk about the fee for all.
Yeah. Why were they all moving in 06 to the Sun Belt? What was the reason then?
So the Sun Belt,
they couldn't have all just had bad allergies,
no,
right? And they
no.
got to get to that dry air.
No,
Before
I mean,
you elaborate on that, I pulled up this stat. It says more than 1 in 10 Americans moved in the first part of 2021 alone. 35 million address changes in the last year.
Yeah. So the U.S. Census Bureau comes out with data on
Wow.
how many people moved, and actually 2021 was one of the lowest ever. Now that's all people moving. That's like me moving like from one part of a city to another, not just moving across the country.
Okay.
But we actually had near a record low in moving during the pandemic. I'm not sure if you'd be able to find the data quickly.
Moving in general, or just moving to the
Type
Sun
in
Belt?
like Google U.S. Census, like if you Google U.S. Census Bureau 2021 people moving, I think you'll see news articles that talk about it. It was the lowest year ever for a percentage of the population that moved. Now, there was still a decent amount of people that moved to the Sun Belt. Now, you think about the pandemic, it lowered the amount of people like moving from one apartment to another in the same city. So that was part of reducing the move count.
Okay.
There were still a lot of people who moved and changed cities, moving from San Francisco to Dallas. But to get to your question of why were people moving back in 05-06? Because people have been moving to the South forever.
Oh,
like,
no doubt.
This is like a big thing I think people forget, and why the U.S. Census Bureau provides invaluable data on migration trends going back 30 years. And what you see is that there's actually kind of like a cyclical trend to the people fleeing California and New York. Once every 10 to 12 years, there is a big outbound migration from California and New York. And actually, California lost more people in the early 90s, way more people as a percentage of its population than it's losing now.
Oh.
And there's these factors at play, like when housing, it tends to correspond to housing bubbles.
Mm-hmm.
When housing gets really expensive in New York and California, like it's always expensive, but when it gets really expensive, people say, I can't deal with this anymore. I'm moving to the more affordable area. It also has to do with social unrest and crime. So obviously New York and California are dealing with outflows from that today. In the early 90s, it was much the same thing. Like California had the LA riots in the early 90s. Like in some ways it was worse back then than it is today.
That's hard to believe.
So I don't know what the exact stat is, but in the LA riots, I think it was like 92, 93. I want to say like thousands of people died.
Wow.
More than the entire country during the social unrest in the 2020 in LA in the early 90s.
That's insane.
Yeah. And so I'm not saying it's good today. Clearly, there's issues that these areas all have, but I'm just trying to draw the point is that there's a cyclical nature to this. And a lot of people are trying to tell themselves that what happened during the pandemic with people moving to Texas and Florida and Tennessee was some new paradigm. It's not a new paradigm. And what we're going to see now is we're already seeing this in California. The home prices are starting to come down. This is what tends to stem the flow. So as home prices in New York and California come down, fewer people are going to leave those areas. And it's not as
Has
if people...
the damage already been done, though, with regard to supply and demand? If you lose that much population, you have these many houses, they're sitting...
Yeah.
Hey, I want to move to Dallas, but I live in Anaheim. I got to sell this to buy that, but no one's moving here. How am I going to sell?
So basically, it's a great question. And the answer is yes. Like,
I'm full of them, dog.
Well, let's keep doing it. The answer is yes. There is some type of permanent loss there. But the thing to think about is that in a place like LA, I think only 53% of households own.
Okay.
So for every owner that leaves, there's a renter
Mm-hmm.
who desperately wants to buy. Whereas in Texas, the ownership share is much higher.
Yeah.
So that's what keeps those markets in the long run expensive, especially because they don't build new homes really in San Diego and LA. They build lots of new homes in Dallas. And so home builders are actually, they tend to go crazy and then there's a bust, but home builders are actually pretty good at like generally figuring out, they don't know it through data necessarily, but they kind of generally figure out like how many people are moving here and how many homes we need to build. And in the long run, Dallas and Austin build tons of homes. Austin builds 8 times more single family homes per capita than San Francisco. So that's why Austin can absorb the migration flow, or could previously absorb the migration flow and not have crazy home prices.
Well, we have, you know how many natural lakes there are in the state of Texas?
I don't know.
I will guess.
12.
1. And it's on the border with Louisiana. So Texas, as soon as air conditioning was invented, became the promise that you can build anywhere, everywhere, all day, as long as you can get water there. Now we have a power grid issue here. There's no doubt about that. But over on the coast, you can't build into the mountains, you can't build into the ocean, and so there's only so much area to build. Also, cost of building much different than it is here.
Through labor, basically, or
yes, and you can build a house here that literally the big bad wolf could blow down. I mean, you should see some of what they build up off 380. It's sticks, felt, siding, insulation, drywall, game over, and this is Tornado Alley, and that's cool.
And why
that passes code?
And that's just kind of like Texas has a low regulation mentality.
Well, energy was so cheap here for so long that it didn't matter. No, and there's not a big hurricane risk. It's not Florida or the Gulf Coast, or we got to make sure that we've got, certain wind ratings. Yes, there's a tornado every once in a while, but if it's going to blow that house down that cost $100,000 more, it was going to blow this house down that cost $100,000 less. So why spend the $100,000 more? Let's just build them for less. It's cheaper. Housing's cheap. That's what everyone says, right? When they move here. Oh my gosh, I couldn't believe the house I could buy for $1 million. If I had $1 million and I was trying to build in Bellevue, Washington, I might get a doghouse out of that. You know what I'm saying?
So you're saying, it's an interesting point. You're saying like the quality of construction. This is an interesting point for home buyers. Like the quality of construction in Texas is not.
It's shocking. It's absolutely shocking. As a contractor, I understand why. A lot of builders have made things much better in terms of energy. You see, I was yelling too loudly on the sidelines coaching rugby, so I lost. So
Can I grab one?
Yes, I'm going to go. They're the lemon mint Ricola. Ricola. I need a sponsor.
Ricola.
Yeah. DM me. Yes, the way homes are built here is insane. It's just insane. It makes very little sense, but it just is what it is.
You know where I noticed that was, so I've only lived in apartments in Texas, but I noticed immediately the noise. Like when I lived in Boston, lived in apartments there, Columbus, I never heard my neighbors ever. And then I moved to Texas,
Columbus,
Ohio.
Yeah, okay.
I lived there for a year before moving to Texas, and every apartment here in Texas, I feel like I can hear everything, and I must be related to what you're talking about, quality construction.
100% it is, and that's all just whatever code. You just have to abide by code. Code enforcement here is reasonably lax in comparison. You also have unions in different portions of the country that drive labor way through the roof. We don't have that here. So that helps to a degree, but you're not getting the same house here in, Bryan, Texas, that you are in Bend, Oregon. It's just built differently. It's built to withstand certain things, whether it's the snowpack, which we don't get here, whether it's, certain other, especially the earthquake regions. We don't have that issue here. So it's hail and it's tornadoes. Well, the chances you get hit by a tornado are very low comparatively to even an earthquake in some parts of the West Coast. So it's maybe you don't have to build them as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's you're making a assessment here. Pros and cons, cost benefit analysis.
I'm oversimplifying to a degree because if you hire certain custom builders, they are going to build you a top of the line. You're going to pay for what you get, and you're going to get a top-notch product.
So can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So my mom is selling her house in New York, and she's going to move to Texas.
Mhm.
And so she's like looking at homes on the market, and so she lives in this old house in upstate New York in the Hudson Valley, which is built with all this old wood, like beautiful Victorian.
Can take 4 feet of snow on its roof,
it's 100,
probably.
120 years old.
Mhm.
So she's struggling trying to find a house she likes here, but she looks at all the existing builds, and she sees like a lot of like the tile, the Texas tile, like the big tiles everywhere. And then, I think she sees, that the quality of construction maybe isn't the best. So you're saying, is it maybe for someone like her better to just build a house, find a good builder?
Obviously it depends on, what her economic capabilities are. Into lots of anything to keep things cool.
I see.
Tons of tile.
So that's why
lots and lots of your tiles and hardwoods. We also have I don't know about you, but when I moved here from Washington, I never experienced allergies like I experienced when I moved here. I don't know if you struggled with that at all.
What is it?
Bro.
Pollen?
Yeah. I mean, mountain cedar coming out of the hill country will absolutely put some people just under for a week at a time. People have to get shots for it, the whole 9 yards. I say all that to say, you see limited carpet maybe only in a few places. You go back east or up north, there's carpet everywhere. Why? It's cold all the time. Here, it's hot all the time.
Interesting.
Yeah, if she wants, or buy something with really good bones, call me, and wherever she's at, I can hook her up with a great contractor who probably square up the floors and make it look the way she wants it to look and feel.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's why they build them.
That's interesting. I never thought that. Yeah, I mean, Texas is hot. It's funny about the heat though. So how long have you lived in Texas?
Not long enough.
All right. Okay, good answer.
Since 90, since 95.
So does the heat bother you?
So here's what I do. Yes. The long and the short of it is yes. But every summer when it gets hot. So last week was our first, the week before. Now for the next 14 days, it'll be 100. So this is what I've done. And I did this like year or two because I came here to play sports and I was like, whoa, this is insane. How do you, whoa.
I can't imagine playing sports in this.
I get out there in the heat of the day. So between 5 and 6:30. And you just, for like a week straight, you just do your workout. I'm talking in it, just dying, and it acclimates you. And for the rest of the summer, I'm at least fine. Now it's still, you'll walk out, we'll walk outside after this and it'll hit us like a blast furnace. One cool thing though about Texas, it's so damn flat. There's usually a breeze.
So it's windy. It's windy here.
And without that, it'd be brutal. Does heat bother you?
No. So, I mean,
Really?
and I don't know, I've only lived in Texas a little under 2 years, so I don't know if I'm still in the grace period here, but from like my perspective moving from New York is like, this is so much better. 100 degrees with relatively low humidity. The humidity is not terrible. I would rather deal with that than 4 to 5 months out of the year of it being 20 degrees through the winter in New York. And so far, I do not mind the heat, but I wonder if it's the type of thing that eventually just starts wearing on you the longer you live here.
It does. And so you just start to structure your time out of town for, the end of the summer. And summer here is nowhere near done at Labor Day. It's done everywhere else at Labor Day. It's done at Lake of the Ozarks at Labor
Halloween.
Day. But yeah, so it'll start wearing you down, especially if you have to work outside. But it just is what it is, right? I mean, the places with the perfect weather have the worst politics, and some of the places with the tough weather have some of the best politics, and I'd rather be where I can open carry than where I've got to, beg, borrow, and steal and ask.
Well, I mean, that's the great thing about Texas, right? And I think what attracted me here is like, it seems, I love America, right? And I love like what America was founded on, freedom and all that stuff. And I feel like Texas is in liberty. And I feel like Texas is really, I don't want to say the last bastion, because I think America's still we're relatively free, but Texas definitely has that more than any place else.
Yeah, I would say
it's a mentality.
Yes,
right?
I'd say that they're running neck and neck with Florida there currently. The Texas spirit that I've always explained it to other people, and they're like, well, why do you live down there? It's Texas, right? What do they say on Full Metal Jacket? The only thing come out of Texas are steers and queers, and I don't see horns on you, boy. Remember?
I never saw Full Metal Jacket. Whoa, it's another one I need to add to the list. Yeah.
I'm not a big war movie guy. Yeah, you got to see that, man.
All right.
Vincent D'Onofrio at his best. Crazy.
Okay.
Yeah. It's an ask forgiveness, not permission attitude here. And it's I want to drill an oil well over there. All right. Get after it. Now, if there's no oil down there, we're not bailing you out. But if there is, then you can make an uninhabitable. The West Texas is like the face of Mars, man.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, you go out there, the Permian Basin, like, come on.
Yeah, we're talking. I've been to Midland, Odessa once, and I remember flying in. I'm never gonna forget what that looked like, flying in on that 50-seat plane into Midland, Odessa. It was like just the oil rigs, and it's just flat, and it's orange and yellow, and sand everywhere. Mm-hmm. It's crazy.
I'm stealing this from I call him Coach Joe Rogan. There's a I watch him and a couple other podcast guys just because that's kind of why I was like, man, that's cool what they do.
Yeah,
I want to try it. So that's why I tried this. There are apparently more tigers in captivity in the state of Texas than there are tigers in the wild in the world.
What?
So I looked that up.
Explain that.
Well, so a lot of people get tigers on the black market, and they think, Mike Tyson loves tigers. If anything, The Hangover taught us that. Maybe the last best R-rated comedy, The Hangover.
Yeah, we need more of those dumb comedies.
I know, but it's politically incorrect now.
Yeah.
There aren't. Apparently, that new Nicolas Cage one is hilarious as hell.
Oh, really?
Yeah, apparently.
I thought it looked dumb, but maybe.
Apparently, it's next level. They'll get a tiger. They think it's a cute little furry tiger, and then the tiger becomes a tiger, and they're like, what do I do?
Whoops.
And so, yeah, I've done a couple of jobs, couple different people, one's a rich attorney here in Dallas, the other one, an oil guy out in Tarrant County, and they have big cat rescues. And so people have these tigers, because that's a big thing. You saw Tiger King, all that.
I never saw Tiger King.
Yeah, you're not missing much there, but apparently that's big business.
Where was that set?
About 90 minutes north of where we're sitting in Winterwood, Oklahoma, right over the border. And the main character of that, he was an Arlington cop for a while. He's in the federal pen out in Fort Worth right now.
Was it illegal?
He whether he did or didn't is up for big internet debate. He put a hit out on somebody, and yes, he was it's a crime, as I understand. I'm no expert, to breed or crossbreed tigers and then sell them. So what would happen is they're breeding all these little, because you have families coming in, they're paying $100 a head to pet a little tiger. Well, there's a lot of irresponsibility there. So a lot of conservationists didn't like that guy. Anyways, the attitude of Texas is, we're going to make it work.
On the tiger thing.
Yeah.
It says that the World Wildlife Fund. So they say there's about 3,900 tigers remaining in the wild.
What?
Texas, 4,000 to 5,000 tigers.
So I'm saying now you can kind of believe it, because our wildlife population on this planet is plummeting. If you've ever been to Europe and hiked around, I love hiking, you don't see any wildlife. You go to Boise, you go 10 minutes off the road in any direction, you're going to see an elk, a moose, a black bear, a brown bear. You just don't see that overseas much. And then obviously droughts and things of that nature and poaching.
So let me ask a question.
That's a crazy stat, though, right?
That's a crazy stat. More tigers in Texas in the world. Could they deal with this climate? Like, if say a couple of them got loose,
Well, think about it.
could we start seeing tigers show up in the mountains, in the mountain, like in Colorado and stuff like that?
I don't know about the colder climates.
But they could do it here.
Well, I mean, think about it.
They're in India, right?
Aren't they
Like,
hanging out in India and parts of the Serengeti and stuff?
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
true,
they're
it's
like,
hot,
"What's
yeah.
up?" I mean, India's brutal. Some of the Calcutta, you wanna go on your wedding honeymoon there? I mean, it's humid as hell. It's like 100 degrees and 100% humidity. You have a good day.
I actually went to India for
Yeah?
a friend's wedding 3 years ago.
Really?
Crazy place.
I bet.
Yeah.
Another really cool movie. I need to give you a movie list. Really cool movie with Ed Harris about these people who escape from a concentration camp in Siberia, and they hike all the way into the Himalayan mountain range in India to escape. It's amazing. It's called The Way
Wow.
Back. It's
All right.
Colin Farrell's in it as well.
Really?
And
Right.
and Rourke Schornen, that Irish gal, I can't say her name. Great movie. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. They could probably adapt. I would think they can adapt.
That'd be crazy if we started seeing tigers just
You're
stroaming around America.
Yeah, you're skiing, and I mean, there's Siberian tigers,
Mm.
and they're huge. So I mean, if they can survive up there,
Yeah, maybe America's what they need to repopulate.
maybe so. We should just let them all out.
Let them go.
Or when Texas goes to secede, we'll all go defend the border of Texas with all of our guns and our pet tigers, and we'll be like, "What's up?"
So let me ask a question about that, because I see like the secede bumper stickers
Yeah.
and all that. Is it a possibility?
Absolutely not.
No. All right.
I mean, I'm
Because-
I'm a libertarian. I have no dog in the common popular. I'm no fan of the United States government, but no, I don't think that would ever even be close to possible.
Yeah. I mean, it's like Texas is so independent, but it's also so American. Like
It
it'd be
is.
like breaking away from America.
But look
would
what
be.
we just learned last February. We can't even power ourselves properly.
Yeah. Although that got me thinking, though, that winter storm in Texas, that Texas could, because I didn't realize Texas is the only state that has its own electric grid.
Mhm.
Like, how could any other, like, how all these other states rely on these communal electric grids? So if any other state seceded, we're just going to shut off your electricity. But if Texas were to secede, Texas would have its own electricity, which I'm not saying Texas should secede. I'm just in my head playing out like whether it would actually be possible. And having your own electric grid as a state kind of makes it more. Plus, Texas has the oil.
And we pump a lot
Texas
of oil.
is half of America's oil production.
Yes.
What would America like? So, I mean, if there's a state that could do it, it would be Texas. But I think you're right.
that
It's not gonna
might.
happen.
I think the might of the American military is greatly underestimated, and
You are
it's way too big. And the military-industrial complex is insanity. Defined 54 million to the Ukraine. It's out of control. Billion.
Yeah.
Excuse me. But no, I don't think that would ever happen. But when I first moved here, just to date myself, when I moved here, there was no internet. And so when I was like, okay, I think I'm going to the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, I legit thought that like maybe there'd be people riding horses to work. For real, I legit thought that. Now you get here and
Maybe in Fort Worth.
it may be out in the stockyards, yeah. But Texas has a rep for sure. I don't, I think there's a lot of people with a lot of Texas state pride. I like living here.
I do. I mean, I've been here 2 years.
What brought you here?
Yeah, I mean, look, it was the pandemic. I was in Columbus, Ohio at the time, and I was on a work assignment for my first consulting gig for Reventure Consulting, and that ended, and I knew I was not going to go back to New York with the crazy stuff that was going on there. And so I had a list of cities. It was like Austin, Raleigh, Atlanta. I wanted to move south to a place that wasn't going to be shut down. And then the more I thought about it, the more it just became obvious. Like I saw some of the stuff that Governor Abbott was doing with making sure stuff stayed open and all that, and so that's what drew me here.
Yeah, and then where'd you first move when you moved to the state?
Austin.
Yeah,
Austin's a crazy place.
true story.
Lived there for 15 months, and I got so I was sucked into that whole narrative and the hype thing that we talked about earlier. Joe Rogan moved there, and
Yeah.
it seemed like the place to be. And then I moved to Austin, and I realized very quickly that Austin is not a and I apologize if anyone lives there and is offended by this, but Austin is not like a good place to live, in my opinion. It's a good place to visit because I just couldn't deal with like all the transient people there. No one had like roots. Everyone was all over the place. Everyone just wanted to drink beer and eat tacos. And I was like, well, are we like moving towards something? Are we ambitious? And it was not the city.
Yeah, Austin is certainly, it's got a different vibe. There's no doubt about it. Lots of capital cities do for some reason in their states. I'm not really sure why that seems to be. Austin might have more of a vibe than any other capital city, though, because if you go to Ellensburg, Washington, it's nothing like Austin, Texas.
Is that the capital of Washington? I thought it was.
I'm sorry, Olympia.
Olympia.
Yes. Yeah. Ellensburg's right smack dab in the middle of the state, which is the ugliest part of the state.
Well, I think Austin, it's a good point. State capital gives you more of like a government liberal attitude.
Yes.
You throw in the University of Texas, and you throw in tech. It's like an interesting mix.
For sure.
But, Austin's still a cool city. It's just, it's a fun place to visit. Anyone who hasn't visited there, you should go. It's just, I realize it's not a place I wanted to live.
Tough infrastructure too. If you have I think about that just because what I do for a living, we drive around so much. It's hard to get around.
There's no interstate loop.
It's insanity. But it's fun, yeah, for sure. The water life and all the parks and the music. Austin City Limits. Been to that many times.
Do you know the story about why? And I don't know if this is true, but I heard the story about why there's no interstate loop in Austin.
No.
I heard that basically when they were doing the federal highway funding program, I don't know if this is like Eisenhower or afterwards, but 50s or 60s or 70s sometime, they offered money to states and cities to build out the interstate system, because every state has like a loop around it. And then Austin apparently turned it down because they were like, we don't want to... It's so funny. They were like, we don't want to grow, or like, we're never going to grow that much. So we're going to turn down the money for the interstate system. And now it's
keep Austin weird.
Keep Austin
Been
weird. I don't know how true that story is, but
when you say California just sort of runs the housing show in the country, why?
It's so funny. If you look back 30 years,
it is an unbelievable. Take all politics aside, that state is beautiful.
It's beautiful. It's unbelievable.
Unreal.
And that's,
truly,
it's unreal. And over the last 3 decades, that's where the wealth creation's been in America, specifically related to tech. And California goes through these things. Like, it's such a boom or bust state. And people don't realize it. Like, in the early 90s, they didn't have tech in the same way they had now, but they were like heavy on defense contracting in the late 80s, early 90s. And then like that was where the tech was. A lot of defense contractors were there. And then as soon as the Cold War ended, lights out. Huge recession in the early 90s. Huge housing crash in the early 90s. Home values in LA went down 7 straight years from 1990 to 1997 by 26% over 7 years. And it's because for some reason, it seems to be that's where like the wealth, whatever like the trend is on the wealth and where the money's being made, it concentrates there. Maybe because that's where people want to be. But it tends to like concentrate in a very singular, unique way. And they don't really have a diversified economy. So then when there's a bust in defense contracting, we have a major recession in California that then also triggers like a housing downturn in other cities that are related to California. Mid-2000s, San Diego's housing bubble was one of the first to pop in 2006. And it started popping there before we saw really the housing bubble pop everywhere else in America. And it's partially also related to the migration. So things get bad in California, the economic opportunity drives up, the prices go up, people start leaving, which then makes the crash happen there first. And so it's just I'm fascinated by California. It's so up and down, people leaving, people coming back.
It's always on fire.
It's always on fire.
Yeah.
It's always
on fire.
Huge levels of wealth, but then huge levels of wealth destruction.
Yes. There's a huge a very massive level of wealth disparity as well.
Oh, huge.
Because you got all the farmers up in the valley, who are just scratching in the dirt to make, a living, even up in wine country. I mean, those people aren't rolling in it. If they own the land, they can leverage that. But in terms of where those super rich people live and how many of them there are and how that skews the wealth of the state compared to everyone else, it's amazing to look at those numbers. And you're the numbers guy, not me. But
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, what's sad about the Central Valley, like Stockton and Fresno and all those places, is that, I did an analysis. Actually, one of my biggest trending YouTube videos was looking at the worst cities in America. And I looked at it through.
That's some clickbait.
Oh yeah,
Worst cities in America.
I think
Did you get some real friendly comments on?
People liked it, generally speaking,
Did they?
Because when I make these videos, I don't hypothesize.
Yeah.
I apply data to it. So that's what I did.
You're not adding your editorial.
No. I said, what are the cities that have the highest unemployment rate? What was it? Oh, it was 3 things: high unemployment, high crime, and expensive housing. Like, you shouldn't be able to have a combination of those things.
Yeah.
Right? It should, because if you're high unemployment and high crime, homes should be cheap.
Mm-hmm.
But the cities in California, in the Central Valley, are expensive. Like Stockton home prices are higher than Austin.
People don't realize
Sacramento
that.
is really expensive.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But then they have high crime and the highest unemployment rates in America. So it's like this vicious, it's kind of like this vicious circle there. And those are really tough places to live.
If you were, just sitting down having a cold one with, a table of new Frisco friends, and there were a couple of them sitting at the table with you, and they were, real estate investors, especially, let's just stay focused like we have been most of this. What we've talked about is the single family.
Yeah.
What would be your advice to them? Your honest advice, not your opinion, because you don't even interject your opinion. You are the opposite of the mainstream media. You use data and facts, and that's what you report. What would you be like? They'd be like, Nick, what do you think? What should I do? Should I pivot? Should I start doing some customer service, client contracting? What should I do, man? What would you say to them?
Yeah, well, it's always important to understand people's goals, right? And like how long, what's your time horizon with buying a house for an investment? Whether you're actually an investor or a home buyer, because that's a key thing. If you're just wanting to buy because you want to buy, now's not a good time to do it. But if you're saying, I want to find my investment that I'm going to hold for a decade, I want to find a house I'm going to live in for a decade, I wouldn't say don't buy today. You could still potentially find some value. You just got to be willing to ride out the volatility. Be honest with yourself. You're buying at the top of market. Values are going to go down. Are you willing to ride that out? Is an important question to ask. If the answer is yes, then I think you could still buy today. But I personally, there's a couple cities that I think are ones that represent good value still today. And they might have a correction, but like one is Oklahoma City.
Mm-hmm.
I almost moved there actually before moving to Dallas from Austin. And I'm shocked because Oklahoma City is like the rare breed of a city that is growing, is cheap. There's actually a very rare combination these days.
And is fairly safe.
Yeah. I think some of the crime reports, depends where you go, might be higher, but like lots of nice suburbs there. And I spent a lot of time there in Oklahoma City. I was shocked. Like they have restaurants that are 10-course tasting menu, fixed priced restaurants. Like they have like
they do
bougie, like, the smoothie shops and the vegan granola
performance art centers, things of that nature.
You know what that made me realize? It made me realize that like most cities in America have that stuff.
Absolutely.
Like the coast, and maybe this is the one argument to suggest.
Maybe not Mississippi, but
maybe
anywhere
not,
in Mississippi.
Maybe not Jackson, Mississippi, or Baton Rouge,
possibly
Louisiana.
not.
But this is maybe one argument to suggest we could see more migration in the future, because New York and LA no longer have a monopoly on the culture. Because as soon as something cool happens, like with a restaurant or an idea or something, it's on Instagram, it's on social media, and someone in Oklahoma City or Wichita, Kansas, they can open up that concept. I met someone at a bar in Dallas who lives in Wichita, and she's opening up a plant shop. You go in Wichita, go and you look for plants, and then you have cocktails.
A margarita. Yeah.
And I'm like, that's so cool. That's in Wichita. And so I would say, look where other people aren't looking, because I think there's going to be growth for some of these really cheaper middle of America cities like Oklahoma City or Wichita. Market like Pittsburgh, I like a lot. It's cheap there. Home prices didn't go down in the last housing crash in Pittsburgh. Tends to be more stable.
Just a bummer winter, but yeah.
Hey, some people like seasons. Not me.
Bundle up. Yeah. I think that you're right. The internet, social, it's just crazy how it it will mainstream something so quickly. And like you said, there are no longer these monopolies in terms of, well, if you really want to see a good play or a good concert or a good rock show, you've got to go here or here. Man, everybody's touring, everything's everywhere.
Yeah, it's great.
There's beautiful facilities everywhere. I mean, the facilities in Dallas, the Windspear and the Meyerson, if you've ever been to a symphony or a performance there, they're next level. It's unbelievable. Those weren't there when I moved here.
Yeah.
They are now. So when you decided to go the Reventure route, did you decide I'm going to do that? And at the same time, did you say I'm going to start this YouTube channel as well?
No.
Okay. What was the, you've already explained the fearless way in which you took down the, I'm starting Reventure. What made you say, I want to start in at this YouTube thing?
It's a good question. I don't really know. I think a couple people whispered in my ear, like I should do it. You know, I didn't really think about it when they did it.
When they whispered in your ear, what did you think about that suggestion?
I was like YouTube, maybe. Like, I was just like, okay.
Yeah.
Potentially.
Right.
Nice idea. But you know, what started happening was when I was trying to grow Reventure Consulting as a data business for real estate investors, I started realizing that the real estate investors aren't that interested in the data. And that started getting me frustrated.
Sure.
You know, I mentioned this before, but like so many of the real estate investors had their idea already of where they wanted to be, and they were just following the trend.
Moneyball, man.
And that did not appeal to me because I wanted to be original. I wanted like my ideas to be out there and to be followed, I guess, selfishly. And so I think maybe that prompted me. I was
you're an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
You want your idea to work.
I want my idea to work.
Yeah.
And so I said, let me record a video of me. I think it was maybe Austin or Columbus, Ohio or something. I did a video recording, like looking at zip codes in these cities with the home price appreciation by zip code.
Good idea.
And then the one on Austin, this was around October 2020. I did it on Austin. By December, the one on Austin went like semi-trending. It got 15,000 views. I had like 100 or 200 subscribers at the time. So that was a big deal because that was around when Oracle announced that they were moving their headquarters to Austin.
Okay.
So that was like peak Austin froth boom. So I actually do owe a lot to Austin. Yeah. And then channel started building. I think by March 2021, I might have had 1,000 subscribers, hit monetization. Once you get 1,000 subscribers, you know, you can start earning some money off the advertising revenue. And then it was really April 2021. I did a 3-part series on why I thought the U.S. housing market was in a bubble. It was going to crash. I said by the end of 2021, I was about 6 months early. And that series got like 50,000 views a video.
Do you think that's because everyone was sitting at home, sitting on their hands for 2 weeks becomes 2 years to stop the curve? I mean, for sure. And they're looking and they're wondering what's going on. And
yeah, it was it was fortuitous, right? It was like it was right at that point where the housing bubble started becoming national news. People were sitting at home, you know, so I was very fortunate in that respect. And then after those videos, it just kind of took off. And
snowballed,
I think from like March 2021 to July, I went from maybe 10,000 to 50,000.
Wow.
From July 2021 to October 2020, I went from 50 to 100,000. And then over the last 6 to 7 months, I guess.
You got your plaque?
Got my plaque on the back of the, it's in my videos actually in the back.
Yeah, I know. There, so I love that, man. It looked like by the time you got it, by the time they mailed it to you, what were you at by then?
It took forever.
Yeah.
I don't know. Right. It took so long.
Yeah.
Google's weird. Like they do these things where I think they like test you. Because I even remember trying to like confirm my address for them to get the monetization. It was like I had to jump all through these hoops. I had to keep requesting. I think Google's smart. They like make you wait to make sure you're like
in it to win
it. But yeah, I mean, it's been an unbelievable experience.
Most of what you found, did you just discover on your own, just trial and error? Where you're a data guy, you're I'm going to wait to act till I know the data, or did you do some research in terms of how you built your channel, or you knew what you're going to, was that more of a just go at it
intuitive
type of thing?
That was intuitive. Cool. Very much my channel is like what I'm interested in.
Love it.
Talk about, I don't spend much time researching trends.
What
or
trends?
Anything.
Yeah.
Because if you're following the trend, you're not going to succeed. Like if you're following the trend, you're going to do just enough to do okay. But my whole channel, my whole thing is to be ahead of the curve,
Sure.
right? Ahead of the curve on the housing market, ahead of the curve on what's going on in the broader economy. And to do that, I got to, like you said, kind of like fearlessly put out what my ideas are. And, for a lot of the last year, I got a lot of crap for saying the housing market was in a bubble. Even like 3 months ago, people, sometimes viciously in the comments were like, "Oh, you're wrong."
Oh,
you're
there's a
horrible."
couple of people with ridiculous in my opinion, because they're so surface level, criticizing your numbers or what you're saying. Those don't make much sense. Once that started to catch fire though, once you started to put your stuff up on YouTube and people, so these are not obviously not real estate investors, or maybe some of them were, and then started to see the value of what you were doing. Did you end up being able to get them to subscribe so you could give them their,
I think
or
so.
do they still not?
I think for some people, I see it in the comments sometimes. Like I'll see sometimes the same sometimes a commenter will be kind of rude and be like, "You're an idiot," but then on another video they'll have like a positive comment.
Yeah.
So I think I have converted some of them. But it's funny. I never once watched any of those videos that was like critical of me.
Good for you.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
I just always knew it was a distraction.
100% it is. I mean, when winners don't really care what they're saying on the sideline, they're on the field laying hits, man.
It's a good
point. If I'm going, "Oh, you don't like that I hit your quarterback too hard." Good deal. I'm about to hit him twice as hard.
Yeah, let's do it.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask you something before we kind of get into wrapping this up. A couple things. It's either Door or Opendoor that's running such a massive, that's got carrying so much debt because they own so much inventory and I have no idea. Again, it's me, kind of a novice, but has some experience reading through. Why is that? Are they backed by some dark force? And by dark, I mean, again, an outside influence like the Fed messing with a free market. Why are they carrying so much debt?
Yeah, so Opendoor is the biggest home flipper. Opendoor, and you see their stuff around Dallas, right? They have a lot of properties. You'll see the sign in the front lawn, Opendoor owns this home, and they're a home flipper, and they're a national home flipper, which has never existed before. So they buy a house, often they overpay for it, and then they hope to like list it at a higher price and sell it for a profit. They also earn a fee on the initial acquisition of the home from the original home buyer. And this is a company that I think is going to go out of business. And this is something I've been researching a lot. I'm going to do a video on it soon.
Okay, awesome.
So it's funny. They do have a decent amount of debt. They also have a lot of cash because there was this bonanza when Opendoor went public in 2020 via a SPAC IPO that a lot of these companies were able to raise a lot of cash. So I've gone back and forth a lot thinking whether a company like Opendoor is going to survive, but ultimately I don't think they will because they don't offer value. So they're buying houses and then selling and then flipping them on a national scale. They're not doing major renovations, that's one of the main ways a home flipper adds value, right? Is you buy a house that needs upgrades. They don't do that. And they use cheap, to your point, they use cheap credit facilities. They have these credit facilities with these different banks where the rates were low. They were low because when the short-term interest rate was zero, the facility might have been like, and I don't know exactly, so don't get mad at me, Opendoor. I'm not quoting this exactly. It was like, it'd be the Fed funds rate or the LIBOR rate plus 2%. And so or plus 3%. And so when the Fed funds rate or the interest rates are zero, that's only a 3% cost of debt. But this is where the Fed hiking rates gets kind of fun, is that all of a sudden it increases the cost of debt on all these credit facilities. Now it's 1.5 or 1.75% plus 3%.
Wow.
Now we're starting to get to a point where Opendoor's cost of capital is going to increase every time the Fed hikes rates into a down housing market where home sales are collapsing. So that type of company is going to have a lot of inventory now sitting on their books. They're trying to buy even more homes at a time period where they're going to be able to sell less. And so I'm predicting, I think that this is a company that's not going to survive. That
model is just so flawed. And while they were, the first arriver or whatever, you've got what now? You got Door, right? You got Orchard. You got
Orchard. Orchard's another one.
There's just a bunch of them doing the same thing.
Very few. none of these companies really make money. Opendoor did a slight profit last quarter. It's going to be hard to replicate going forward.
So again, they're just pushing ones and zeros around and calling it a business, and they don't ever have to make money until somebody calls them on it. Like tech.
Right.
I mean, they are a
tech company, right? This is the broader issue. They're
a tech company trying to work in real estate and construction where they don't have competencies.
Exactly. You know,
do you know how hard it is to flip a house? One house?
I'm sure it's very hard.
It is not easy.
What's the biggest hurdle?
Sure. So you want to get into flipping because you want to put a red wig on and be Chip Gaines. So right, you want to flip and so you can do your own thing and have your own schedule, whatever your reasons are. Okay, you might know something about construction. You may have built houses. Okay, I want you to explain to me how you're going to get 10 to 25 different tradesmen in and out in a timely fashion if you only own one. Because the only way you can run different good subcontractor tradesmen is running them one job to the next job to the next job. To the next job, to the next job, to the next job, to the next job.
That's the only way you're going to have access to them.
So you're going to have access, but you're not going to have timely access or leverage. So what ends up happening is I give you a deposit to frame out or do this demo. You take my deposit. I don't see you for 2 weeks because you're overworking for that contractor, that contractor, that contractor. I'm home flipper trying to start with one house because I took a second mortgage on my house or got an inheritance or whatever, or got hard money and I can only afford my first one. How am I going to run my trades properly? That's right. Also, especially here, the houses are built differently in different parts of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, especially because the soils are so much different. That's why, in terms of contracting companies, the number one contracting companies in Dallas-Fort Worth in terms of volume, HVAC. Number 2, roofing, because all the hail. Number 3, foundations. Now those may change in terms of who's number 1, number 2, number 3. Roofing, you don't have to have a license. Foundation, you do have to have licensed engineering on. So those can change. HVAC, you must have a license to operate. The barrier to entry to roofing is very low. So there's a roofer on every corner, just like there's a realtor on every corner because everyone knows a roofer. Mm-hmm. So to be successful at it, you would either have to find a jack of all trades, which is findable, who can come in there and he can kind of be your foreman and he knows a bunch of guys and he's bringing in a drywall guy, a flooring guy, a framing guy, right? But if you can't find that guy, and that guy's actually reasonably rare, because most of these guys stay in their lane, they do their job.
Subcontractor specific thing.
That's right. And so
you want the GC. You need to know a guy that's kind of a GC.
You got to be
owner's rep or something.
If you want to be a flipper and you want to make money, you cannot hire a GC. That chews your entire profit margin up. You have to be the GC.
You have to be the GC. So you need. Would it be called owner's rep? The person you're saying you need, like that guy who's just like looking out for you and who can organize the.
He would be like your foreman.
Your foreman.
Really, I think you would call him more of a foreman. And yes, you would pay him a little more than everyone else, but a GC is going to charge you minimum 20%.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of fluff in there. I am a GC, so I know every trick in the book. There's
general conditions.
Yeah, there's lots.
What's in those general conditions?
It's ridiculous.
So it sounds like you're saying just flipping is very difficult to get off the ground because there's a benefit to scale, right? Once you have the scale, you can build the team and like.
I think if you start really, when people ask me, hey, I want to start flipping, I've watched a couple of your videos. I will say, okay, you need to find a condo. That's where you need to start. Get a condo. All you need to do is repaint, change out all the fixtures, no biggie. It's these people who go in and they're like, I want to do this and that and that and that because they watch HGT. Yeah, well, move it to open concept and all of that. They get into a lot of trouble. So again, it's when they overreach, they get into trouble. It's difficult too because if you're first starting out as a flipper and you don't have a track record with some of these guys, you're gonna get burned so hard, and there goes your profit again. And so I tell everyone who asks me, If you break even on your first flip,
Good
you
job.
have won
Wow.
because you just got your full education and you paid for it all at one time. So it's not a perfect science.
So it's interesting. So it's to start, it's struggle. It's hard to start, but it's interesting. Opendoor is like the complete other end of the spectrum, right? And that they have the most scale of anyone. But it's almost like you want to find a sweet spot because Opendoor is too much scale, right? Like they are in so many markets that there's no way they can be an expert. There's no way that they can keep their finger on the pulse.
And they're buying too high to just wholesale it off. That's my observation.
Right. Okay. So a good wholesaler would be able to find a deal at a discount, get a house that's not on the market for cheap. Opendoor is just coming in and like,
they are, because
Pay
what are they?
market rate.
What's their advertisement? Oh, you got a job? You're not gonna have to pay a realtor. We're gonna get in there. We're gonna buy it at a market rate. We're gonna have you out of there in 2 weeks. And as a home seller, you're like, okay, awesome. Maybe I didn't get every penny, but it was fast, and I didn't have to pay a full realtor's fee or whatever the hook is.
I see the benefit for the seller. For
Most
Opendoor.
definitely.
But it's when you really think about it, yeah, they offer value to the seller for sure. But then you realize they're just importing cheap capital from Wall Street to subsidize them not providing value for the buyer. That's the problem. They're not providing value for the buyer, right? There's a good flipper provides value for both.
Yes.
Right? Opendoor is just providing value for the seller, and because their price is so high.
Yeah, I mean, some of the best flips. Well, I always say that in business, it's not a good deal if both sides don't win.
Right.
If I win and you lose, you're never going to talk to me again. And that's not my idea of good business. I want you not only to talk to me again, I want you to tell everyone about me. Now, that doesn't mean that I lose and you win. It means we both win. Do we both win by 20? No, we tie, right? We both take the same amount.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
An Opendoor, it's too good to be true. It's we're going to give you this so that we want you to pick us because they need their numbers up so that on that balance sheet it looks exactly a certain way.
No, it's such a good point.
But it's that whole, if it's too good to be true, it is, and it always is. I just didn't know if maybe you had some insight, some behind the curtain insight. Obviously they've got Wall Street money, but you don't think there's bigger hands at play there?
So. I mean, look, they're a publicly traded company. I go through their 10Ks and 10Qs. I think it's pretty simple what they're doing. You know, it's the cheap capital, it's the cheap debt that came through during the pandemic and even before the pandemic, and that allowed them to grow. Up market allowed them to grow. Now they're going to have to deal with a down market and more expensive debt and a business model, which to be honest isn't great. They make 5% on this on the original purchase from the original seller, and that's how much money they make. And then they have all their admin costs. Like it's not, you know, flipping is not a great business.
It's not scalable at all.
Not at that scale. It's like scalable at the regional level,
to
right?
a degree.
To a degree.
Because where do you find project managers who've seen everything and know how to do everything that you don't have to micromanage? You can't, because those guys are going to go try to flip their own stuff with their own private money. So you can't line up enough good guys that if you were the GM of the DFW region, you just be like, yeah, y'all show me your reports once a week. I'll leave. It'll be hands off. No, there will be problems all over the place that need to be solved. If you bring people in from out of the region to try to build the way things are built here, it's not rocket science, but there's some weird stuff everywhere that people build differently because of different, weather patterns, like I've mentioned before, geology, the soils, things of that nature.
And it makes sense why contractors are historically flippers, right? Historically, it's you could correct me if I'm wrong, but historically, before Opendoor and all this madness, and even before HGTV, the people who flipped homes were contractors and realtors.
Yes,
because they knew. I
feel like that's a very true statement.
Yeah,
they knew the market, and then you go in. Maybe it's an open bid, right? You walk in, the thing's on a tax lien, or I don't know. Maybe it's a estate sale and they're just like, we're going to auction this off. A wholesaler's helping us with it. Well, if you walk through there and you flipped 10 houses within a 2-mile radius and everybody you're competing against has no idea that there's a serious bedrock or water table problem, but you do, you're going to come in and go, I'll give you this for it. And you're going to have a lot of other people saying, oh no, I'll give you 20 more for it. And you go, cool, I'm out. And they just, they take it right on the chin there. So,
and then maybe you buy it from them at a discount later on.
I've been involved in some very interesting scenarios, man. Experience is knowledge. Everything else is just information. Einstein said that, and nothing could be truer on the face of the planet, right? You can read it in a book. You can watch it on YouTube. Until you've had to sweat it out, you don't know what the hell you're talking about.
Yeah, and so it's probably the other recommendation, right? If someone's trying to get into flipping, you better know that you're going to be, it's a full-time job, right? You're going to have whatever your job, you're trying to do this on the side.
Yeah.
Like this is going to be something that's going to consume you. It's going to have to, if you want to be successful at it. And this is like the thing, right? To be successful at anything, it kind of has to consume you. Like this is one thing for me. Like I've never been a good person at like the multitasking.
Okay.
Which is probably why I actually don't own investment properties and I don't do flipping myself, because I'm not a good like taskmaster.
A lot of people aren't good multitaskers.
Yeah.
Multitaskers who think they are. That's awesome that you know that about yourself.
I'm not. Like I'm not the guy who's going to be able to say, we have 5 flips and then here are the contractors at each. This is what we need to do. Here's the lender. We need to talk to the lender. Yeah. Oh, we need to go to the permit office. That is not me.
Yeah.
But I think it's a good question to ask. Is that your personality? Right. That personality would do better. Mm-hmm. In real estate investment in general. So yeah, it's important to understand like your own limitations, how you work. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, like what gives you happiness, right?
Absolutely. It's a tough business to be in. We've talked about movies several times.
All right.
If I asked you what movie comes to mind when we talk about the 06, 7, 8 crash, what's the first movie that comes to mind?
I mean, it's got to be The Big Short.
Okay. Right. Swipe, let's roll it, man. See, I told you. I'd try to surprise you, but you wouldn't be surprised. I think Swipe's got a couple clips for us, right, cool. Swipe, to take a look over. I know one of them was one of the most iconic scenes in that movie is when those strippers are all buying all those houses.
Oh, yeah.
And they're like,
you own 5 homes?
Yeah, yeah. So whenever you're ready, Swipe, we'll be ready for you, and we'll just kick it until you want to throw one up on the screen. When someone wants to connect with Reventure, where do they need to email you at?
Yeah, so you can go to my website and submit a contact form, www.reventureconsulting.com. But honestly, the best way to do it is through YouTube.
Awesome.
So go to the Reventure Consulting YouTube channel, become a subscriber, and leave some comments. Or I have a channel membership platform that costs us $4.99 a month. And with that, you get access to interactive graphs and data. But I also communicate like pretty much daily with my channel members through the YouTube community board.
Your software that you've developed, this algorithm, is that the right word for it? How you're bringing this amalgamation of all of this data together?
Yeah, it's I guess you could call it algorithm. It's actually very simple. It's looking at home prices relative to wages in the economy, home prices relative to rents in the economy, because the rents and the wages are really the key things that drive the fundamental value. And then looking at 25 to 30 years of home price trends, and then combining those 3 things and saying, all right, what is the fair value in the market based on the historical trends in each of those 3 things? So you could call it an algorithm, but it's actually pretty simple. And it's beautifully simple actually, in terms of projecting over or undervalued markets. There's not a lot of rocket science to it. You just need to know where to get the data and the right data to look at.
I actually think as coming from the builder side of it, actually the most interesting stats that you put out in several of your videos, especially the video explaining the top 10 that are going to burst and
bubbles,
is permits pulled.
Oh yeah.
And that, how are you able to acquire that data? I mean, obviously you can't, I know this because I go pull a permit and immediately I have 10 or 15 phone calls. Hey, you need an electrician? Hey, you need a plumber? I'm like, good, we're good, dude. So it's obviously public, but is there a main database, a main for the entire country, or you have to go to each region and tap in?
Yeah, so it depends what you're looking for. Like if you want the specific data to help find like specific projects and contractors, you would need to go to like the specific, Denton County or Collin County. But actually the U.S. Census Bureau every month tracks permits at the county and metro and city levels going back 30 years. So I learned basically that the census tracks as data, and I learned how to extract it and put it in a way that I could analyze it. And so every month I get the update on permits in Austin or permits in Dallas, and I load that into my model, and then I compare that each month to the job growth, right? And that's a separate kind of factor, which isn't totally in my model right now, because the job, there's some things where the permits and the jobs can like be volatile.
Sure.
But the permitting data is for free. U.S. Census Bureau has it.
Does the Census Bureau bifurcate the new construction from repairs, remodels, additions?
No repairs. It's only new build permits.
Multi or single?
Single, duplex, 3 to 4 units, and then 5 units plus.
Okay.
Is how they break it out.
Interesting. And I assume you have a system set up so that you're not up at 4 a.m. checking, and you've got AI sorting all of that for you?
Actually, I still download it myself. So
Really?
This is a great thing. I'm not the biggest tech genius, but I just learned how to use some software called Tableau. I download the data in Excel each month, put it into my master spreadsheet, get it into Tableau, and I'm able to visualize it. So, this is something that requires some know-how to do, but it's not like I'm a tech whiz, or anything.
But if you were wanting, if you, for instance, got 10 million left to you by great grandma Mabel, and you were looking around and you're like, oh, I want to buy in Charlotte. Well, was on your list. So it was Raleigh.
Yeah, exactly.
You could connect with you and say, Nick, I really want you to walk me through the numbers because I want to make an educated choice. And I don't only want info I already know, which is where I live. If there's a deal to be had in, Jackson, Mississippi, or Baton Rouge, Louisiana, I want to know because I want in on that.
So exactly. So the value I add is I take all this data that's free and publicly available, and I aggregate it into a way that's understandable and that you can draw conclusions from. And so kind of the reverse to the biggest bubbles is there's another side to that list, which is the markets that are the most fundamentally supported in terms of their home prices and aren't in bubbles. And those would be some markets that I think could be good places to buy right now. And so, the best way to learn more about that, like I said, through the YouTube channel, is actually the best way to connect with me, particularly becoming a channel member on there. And then it's the best way that we can talk and learn if there's something more that we can do.
Badass, man. I love it. I'm into it.
Yeah. That's great to hear.
Yeah. Roll that beautiful bean footage, Swipe.
Everybody does. At least down here.
I'm sorry, what?
Everybody does. At least down here. That way you only put down like 5%.
Well, prices have leveled off though, right?
Yeah, there's a goalie.
Would you mind not moving anymore? I'll still pay you.
Not moving.
Steve Carell's great.
He is.
We're not alone.
Okay, look, if home prices don't go up, you are not going to be able to refinance. And you're going to be stuck paying whatever your monthly payment is once it jumps up after your teaser rate expires. Your monthlies could go up 200-300%.
James says I can always refinance.
Well, he's a liar. Actually, in this particular case, James probably is wrong.
200% on all my loans?
What do you mean all your loans? We're talking about 2 loans on 1 house, right?
I have 5 houses. And a condo.
It's a bubble. Yeah, so it's funny. In many ways, this housing market doesn't have that same type of stuff going on.
Because we got way more responsible with how we started lending.
And so parts of that are true. We don't necessarily have a stripper in Miami or Las Vegas owning 5 homes this time around, but there's other risk factors, right? And so I don't necessarily think we're going to see like the massive foreclosure wave that we did last time. Now we have a backlog of foreclosures because we banned foreclosures for 2 years. So we are going to have foreclosures. I don't think we're going to have, I think the total was close to 10 million.
Banned foreclosures and put landlords with rental properties into into huge binds.
Right.
I mean, I have several friends, you can't evict, and it's, you're just screwed.
Yeah.
You firing that one off?
Oh, this is a great scene.
Hi. How are you?
Have a seat.
Okay, Mr. Bennett from Deutsche Bank. Here we have. So how many people have you talked to about this trade?
A few. There's definitely some interest.
Oh, my boss would have my ass.
You crazy,
That's
Jerry?
not gonna
Get
happen.
lost,
Fuck
Jerry.
you.
Which is why you're here talking to us, wrong number. Sounds like there's a lot of interest.
All right. A few people have invited us in just to laugh at me on this deal. Is that you? Is that what this is?
That's not what this is. That's just how Mark is. Let's see what you got.
I'm sorry.
You smell that? What is that?
What?
What's that smell?
A cologne?
No.
Opportunity.
No. Money.
Okay.
I smell money.
Okay.
Chris. God damn it. This is your basic mortgage bond. All right? The originals were simple. They were just thousands of AAA mortgages bundled together, guaranteed by the US government. The modern ones are different. They're private, and they're made up of layers of tranches.
A portion of something.
Yeah. So
Highest level. AAA is getting paid first.
So this is interesting. So he's talking about the mortgage-backed security
Yes.
situation that exists in the mid 2000s, where banks made loans, and then the banks don't keep the loans on the balance sheet. They sell them into a mortgage-backed security. It's a whole bunch of loans sold together, and then like Wall Street investors will purchase the mortgage-backed security and provide the capital for the bank to give more loans. That system is exactly the same. So a lot of people, like, the mortgage-backed security market is still what propels the U.S. mortgage origination market. So that has not changed. What has gotten better is it seems like the quality of the loans has improved. But it's important for people to remember, and this is a big problem that's going on right now in the housing market, is that right now there's no buyers for mortgage-backed securities on Wall Street right now in 2022.
Why?
Because a couple reasons. The perception the housing market is going to go down. Wall Street investors don't want to buy a pool of loans that they know is going to be potentially underwater in the next year to 2 years. Additionally, higher interest rates and mortgage rates is making it harder for a lot of these, let's just say, borrowers, to make the payments, which is kind of a new issue now that we didn't have in the last couple of years. But the big elephant in the room is the Fed. The Fed owns $2.8 trillion in mortgage-backed securities. They own roughly 25% of the entire mortgage-backed security market. They started buying them in 2008. And so what the Fed has been doing is artificially subsidizing mortgage origination in America. So
no way.
So a bank makes a loan, and they can feel confident there'll be a buyer in a mortgage-backed security pool because the Fed was buying, especially during the pandemic, like tons of them. And so this is the risk factor now. It's not so much maybe that there's going to be like mass foreclosures and all the mortgage-backed securities go to zero. It's going to be like, how do we keep sustaining this mortgage origination market now that the Fed is no longer buying and has said that they're going to start winding down their existing ownership of mortgage-backed securities? The end result is going to be a couple things. Mortgage rates are going to remain elevated for at least probably 6 to 12 months. The other result is like banks are going to become much more strict, even more strict about making loans, which sounds great, but then you almost enter a territory where it becomes restrictive.
No man's land.
No man's land.
Yeah.
And so you don't necessarily need like massive foreclosures to crash the housing market. You just need mortgage origination to plummet. Because if mortgage origination plummets, you're still going to have people who need to sell their home for XYZ reason. But if the buyer pool is 30 or 40% lower, that in and of itself can force home prices down. So ironically, it's almost like the safeguards they put in place, while they're going to prevent foreclosures, or at least the same amount that occurred 15 years ago, they are almost the higher underwriting standards, and the fact that the Fed is no longer buying the mortgage-backed securities could mean that the mortgage origination drops to such a point that the buyer demand isn't there anymore, which then will force home prices to come down.
Are these unintended consequences? Because how is it possible that such smart people could make such drastic miscalculations?
That's a great question. I don't know. It's I think individually, all the people at the Fed are smart, but I think collectively, there's something that goes amiss, and I think if you were to ask a lot of them privately, do you regret some of like all the MBS buying and whatnot? They'd probably say, yeah, maybe it wasn't the best. But this is a situation we're in, right? And so, let's hope the Fed they need to do this, and there's going to be some pain, right? Home sales are going to plummet.
There has to be.
Home prices are going to go down. Mortgage rates are going to be high for a little while.
Yeah.
I think eventually mortgage rates are going to go down because if we enter a recession, that's what tends to happen during a recession. But this is weaning off the addiction of the Fed's support and the free money.
And is his illustration here with the Jenga game pretty accurate?
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. Now, one thing that I think is interesting is I've looked at some mortgage-backed security issuances, and I still think they're pretty liberal with the AAA, and the AA.
Yeah.
Because so there's a big Wall Street landlord
because someone's making a judgment call there, here and there.
Yeah, so they hire ratings agencies.
Yeah.
Moody's would be one. There's S&P would be another.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just actually read a mortgage-backed security prospectus for Progress Residential, who's one of the biggest Wall Street landlords in America. They own homes in Atlanta and Phoenix and Jacksonville and all these places. The way that they raise money, Progress Residential, is they buy a bunch of homes in the last 12 months, 25,000, I think, something like that. And they then issue a mortgage-backed security for their homes. So instead of like 25,000 homeowners all being there, Progress Residential buys 25,000 homes and then gets Wall Street to basically buy the debt.
Right.
Now, I was reading these mortgage-backed securities are rated like AA and AAA, but you know what's crazy? Last year in 2021, Progress was getting 100% LTV on the mortgage-backed securities.
Amazing.
So if they had a house that was worth $350,000, they were getting $350,000 debt financing from the mortgage-backed security. Wow. So that's wild to me because a regular home buyer, there's no way you would get 100% LTV.
No.
And so the Wall Street was, and so that's like a little sketchy to me. So I think there's a risk factor on the corporate investor buying that people don't totally understand. Like, I don't know whether there's going to be a mass sell-off for some of these corporate investor buyers, because now what's happening is the mortgage rates going up means that Progress Residential, every time they issue a new mortgage-backed security, their rate is going up. It was 2.5% a year ago. Now it's going to be close to 6%.
Oh my gosh.
So the Wall Street landlords are also getting squeezed by the higher interest rates. And I just wonder, like, a lot of them bought at the top of the market with a low rental yield. Like, their rental cash flow is not great right now for their new acquisitions, and they were just banking on like appreciation and rent growth.
Yeah.
I don't know. I could see a scenario play out where a lot of these Wall Street landlords, one, aren't able to buy new homes because they can't raise the debt to do it. But then two, to the extent that they overpaid, and to the extent that some of them also use credit facilities from banks to fund it.
Yeah.
The banks have the power in a lot of these facilities to say, like, if they think that the value of homes has gone down by 20%, they can say, pay us down by 20% right now.
Wow.
Margin call. In which case, like, how do you
everybody's screwed?
Everyone's because that would be then happening to everyone at once.
Yeah.
So there's some risk factor there with the corporate ownership investment that I don't, to be honest, I don't even totally understand it, but there's a risk factor there that from these investors could go from pushing home prices up to perpetuating a downturn very fast.
Yeah.
And it all relates to using Wall Street debt and cheap money to fund the acquisition.
Pushing ones and zeros around. Fire us back up, Swipe, if you don't mind.
Lowest rated B's getting paid last, taking on defaults first. Now, obviously, if you're buying B's, you can make more money, but they're a little risky. Sometimes they fail. Chris? Somewhere along the line, these B's and double B's went from a little risky to dog shit. Where's the trash? I'm talking rock bottom FICO scores. No income verification. Adjustable rates, dog shit. The default rates are already up from 1% to 4%, fellas. And if they rise to 8%, and they will, a lot of these triple Bs are going to 0 too. And that, you're too close, is an opportunity.
Ryan Gosling's amazing.
He is.
You're saying that at 8% the bonds fail, and we are already at 4%.
That's right.
If they go to 8, it's Armageddon.
Yeah, that's right.
So you're offering us a chance to short this pile of blocks. How?
With something called a credit default swap. It's like insurance on the bond, and if it goes bust, you can make 10 to 1, even 20 to 1 return, and it's already slowly going bust.
10 to
So
1,
I just
20
want to
to
jump in
1.
here. You know what's amazing? So it's amazing how we had a housing crash in America that lasted from 2007 to 2012. So literally it ended only 10, 11 years ago.
Yeah.
And, they're describing here how it played out. home prices went down 25% across America. They went down by 65% in Vegas.
Right.
Didn't actually go down by that much here, although I think in certain neighborhoods they did. It's amazing how fast people came up with narratives to say it can't happen again, right? Like this happened not long ago at all, and yet people are saying, well, this bubble's justified. Home prices are higher than they were in 06 relative to income. And people are saying, well, it's not going to happen now because we don't have the subprime loans in the same way.
The irresponsible lending.
We don't have that,
That's
so we
right.
can't have a crash. And that's, we talked about the narratives earlier and investors telling themselves things, but that's what's most amazing to me. Is like, this did not happen that long ago.
Yeah.
And
history repeats itself, obviously.
Repeats
but
itself.
this is really fast in terms of repeating itself.
This would be really fast. Like we never...
10 years, 11 years later.
Right. A
we're back in
housing
the same-
cycle typically takes longer than that. And even then, it's rare in U.S. history to have major national housing crashes. But what people miss is, again, going back to the Fed, incrementally over the last 30 years, what the Fed has been doing, here's really what low rates do. Low interest rates, money printing. It increases volatility is what it does. It increases the booms and the busts because you provide like the capital and the jet fuel to make the boom bigger. And then invariably it can't sustain itself because if the underlying income and wages aren't there, there's going to be a bust. And so
I mean, the numbers don't lie. We're talking about math, man.
What's the home price? What's the rent? What's the income of the person that lives
It's
there?
linear. There's no interpretation needed. It's numbers.
It's numbers. So right now in America, the typical home value or home price is 4.8 times the median household income, 4.8x. The long-term average over 50 years is 3.3x. So we're about 40 to 50% above that long-run average right now. The only other time in U.S. history this ever happened was 06. Like, it's so clear. You look at the graph, it's like a long line,
Insanity.
Stable home prices to incomes, and then 06, and then now. And it's so obvious when you look at it. And that's why the housing market is actually very simple, from a macro perspective. Wages, income, how's it compare to prices and mortgage payments? And so, my hope is that we do get more sophisticated, I guess, about looking at the housing market. This would be maybe my mission at Reventure Consulting, is to help people just become more sophisticated and understand the data and how the housing market works. And not to say don't ever buy or don't buy into a bubble, because some people will make money buying into a bubble. It's to say, like, arm you with the right data and the right way of thinking about where we are in the housing cycle.
Sure.
Right? Because you need that. If you don't have that, then you're just going to get jerked around by whatever the conventional narrative is, which is often wrong.
Once again.
Yeah.
The narrative. Cutting through the narrative. Should we finish this clip off, Swipe? The cast in this movie is just insane.
And
Ridiculous.
No one is paying attention because the banks are too busy getting paid obscene fees to sell these bonds.
But wait, you are the bank. When you work for the bank, I bet your margins are pretty nice and fat.
Let's not talk about my margins, by the way. Being nice and fat. That's a nice shirt. Do they make it for men?
Aren't you the bank?
I work for the bank. I don't think like a bank. Big bank, small bank, I like to make money. All right? Let me put it this way. I'm standing in front of a burning house, and I'm offering you fire insurance on it.
How can these underlying bonds be as bad as you say? It wouldn't be legal.
Nobody knows what's in them. Nobody knows what's in the bonds. I've seen some that are 65% AAA rated, that I know for a fact are filled with 95% subprime shit with FICOs below 550.
Get the fuck out of here.
You want me to really blow your mind? When the market deems a bond too risky to buy, what do you think we do with it? Take a guess.
I don't know. You tell me.
All right. You think we just warehouse it on the books? No.
Definitely not.
We just repackage it with a bunch of other shit that didn't sell and put it into a CDO.
A CDO.
Yes, a CDO.
What is that?
This is where we take a bunch of Bs, double Bs, and triple Bs that haven't sold, and we put them in a pile. And when the pile gets large enough, the whole thing is suddenly considered diversified. And then the whores at the rating agency give it a 92, 93% AAA rating. No questions asked.
Say that again.
A collateralized debt obligation. It's important to understand because it's what allowed a housing crisis to become a nationwide economic disaster.
Yeah.
Here's
so,
world famous chef.
The upshot to this bubble is that I don't think we're going to have like the spread throughout the banking and financial system, right? So like what he's talking about with the collateralized debt obligation is that they took banks all of a sudden started leveraging themselves up on these assets and trying to make money, and that almost brought the entire financial system down
because of the double dip.
Because what do you mean?
Well, not to sound like too much of a novice, but it's already a bad investment, and they know it, but then they leverage it.
Yes. Okay.
So you're losing twice.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Leverage makes it worse. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're totally right. So I don't think we're gonna have this massive banks shutting down and the economy on its knees because of this housing downturn. And I think it's important for people to reframe.
It already is.
Well, I guess in certain ways, it's going to happen differently, right? It's not going to be banks necessarily like not having capital and shutting down. It's going to be like banks now are almost like so cautious that like, think about it this way. We have an inflationary environment right now where the cost of everything is going up. The personal savings rate's 4%, 4.4% in April. So people don't have money or that much money left. To sustain this, we need banks to kind of go nuts like they did in 05, 06, 07 to sustain this. And you look at the CEO of JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon, he's saying, we are preparing for a recession. We are stockpiling cash on our balance sheet. Like the banks are not behaving like they're going to provide fuel to this fire.
No.
And neither are the consumers are spending a lot of money, but then you look at the consumer sentiment, it's the worst it's ever been right now, according to the University of Michigan. So this is more going to be like the banks and consumers basically say, no more. I'm tapping out.
And that consumer sentiment is the worst it's ever been for a variety of reasons that may not have anything to do with housing. In terms of the overall
this is all
psychological.
Yes. It's all linked, right? Like, ultimately the housing market's a function in the end of the broader economy, in the end of the wages and the jobs, right? So to the extent that consumers stop spending and businesses have to shut down and lay people off, that's negatively going to impact the housing market. And the problem right now is like the prices of everything are so high. And from my perspective, there's not enough capital in the system to sustain it, which sounds crazy because when you say that the Fed printed, I don't know what it was, $5 trillion during the pandemic, that seems like enough money to sustain this for a long time. But the thing is, you got to look at the wages. Because ultimately, that's how you got to look at two things: the wages and the bank loans.
Yeah,
those are the only two real ways that enough money can get into the system to propel it forward. Right? Is wages have to go up, not by 5%; they have to go up by 10%.
Like you previously explained that they did in the 70s.
Like they did in the 70s,
and then everyone is saving more.
Yeah, or banks need to just turn on the spigot and say, we're gonna raise your credit limit.
And they're not going to do that unless Uncle Sam says do that.
Right. And even then they might not, because what the other problem here is that I think when eventually they get accommodative again, and we're going to have a recession, I think, for that to happen, I think a lot of businesses at that point are going to be like, we just went through like this twice now in 2 to 3 years. Like we are not going to just all of a sudden snap back. Like there's a company called Sonder. I don't know if you've heard of them. They do master leases. So they rent out entire floors of apartment buildings and then turn around and Airbnb. It's kind of like an Airbnb, a short-term rental.
I've heard of the concept.
So they take long-term lease risk to then rent things out short-term. They had to lay off or furlough 30 to 35% of their staff in 2020. Almost went out of business. A lot of their competitors did in that space. I actually lived in Columbus in a Stay Alfred unit, which they rented an entire floor of an apartment, and I rented it out for them for 3 months. Stay Alfred went out of business, and I had to leave that apartment. Sonder stayed in business. So, but here's what's crazy. You would think, Sonder stayed in business. Maybe they're just by their bootstraps. No, they raised like a crazy funding round in 2020, 2021, and then they went public. They're now a publicly traded company. Despite having a business model which is suspect and having laid off 35% of their workforce in 2020, just 2 days ago, they announced again they're laying off 20% of their workforce because they're a tech company that doesn't make money. So how much? I almost think like the next time the Fed does this, fool me once, shame on. Was it fool me once, shame on?
Fool me once, shame on you.
Fool me twice, shame on me. I think that's kind of what the economy is going to be like. I don't think.
How could it not be at this point? Because general overall distrust across the board, doesn't matter what the vertical is. We're talking about housing today. Is off the charts. Let's knock this out, Swipe.
Blaine.
Bourdain.
Rest in peace.
Okay, I'm a chef on a Sunday afternoon, setting the menu at a big restaurant. I ordered my fish on Friday, which is the mortgage bond that Michael Burry shorted. But some of the fresh fish doesn't sell. I don't know why. Maybe it just came out. Halibut has the intelligence of a dolphin. So what am I going to do? Throw all this unsold fish, which is the triple B level of the bond, in the garbage and take the loss? No way. Being the crafty and morally onerous chef that I am, whatever crappy levels of the bond I don't sell, I throw into a seafood stew. See, it's not old fish. It's a whole new thing. And the best part is they're eating 3-day-old halibut. That is a CDO.
Well, I just need to know how these could possibly be correlated.
So somehow you're like Mr. Dora the Explorer, and you're the first person who has found this thing.
Hold on. So mortgage bonds are dog shit. CDOs are dog shit wrapped in cat shit.
Yeah, that's right.
Institutions treat these CDOs like they're as solid as treasury bonds, and they're going to zero.
No, it can't be right. There were $500 billion in housing bonds sold last year alone. The ratings agencies, the banks, the fucking government. You're saying they're all asleep at the wheel?
Yeah. My whole department's long on this stuff. They call me Chicken Little. They call me Bubble Boy.
A's, 0. B's, 0. Double B's, 0. Triple B's, 0. And then that happens.
What is that?
That's America's housing market.
Ooh. Oof, man.
Thank you.
Fucking hey, Jerry.
And it
Shut your
was.
fucking mouth. Yeah.
What a great movie.
Awesome movie, man.
It's worth a rewatch.
I agree.
watched it like a month ago.
Did you?
Yeah.
I haven't seen it in so long.
It's really worth watching right now.
Will you repeat just again, best way to get in touch with you, anybody who's interested in connecting with you through the Reventure YouTube?
Yeah, the best way
put your link up
to
and
get in
everything.
contact with me is through my YouTube channel, Reventure Consulting. Go to it, subscribe, and if you like the content, consider becoming a channel member. The cost is $5 a month, and I provide access to exclusive data and graphs, as well as communication directly with channel members on the community board. So go to the Reventure Consulting YouTube channel, check it out.
Nick Gerli, you are a savage and a gentleman, man. I appreciate that. That was time. awesome. That was
I hope
awesome.
you enjoyed
that
that
as
as
much
much
as
as
I
I
did. That was one of the favorite podcasts that I've ever had the opportunity to sit down. Unbelievable topic, matter, back and forth, all kinds of topics. Great data. Nick is so bright, so smart. I strongly urge you to check out his YouTube channel, Reventure Consulting, on YouTube. Become a member if you're interested in the info he provides. You want to talk about a value add. Good God Almighty. Hope you enjoyed it. Really do. I love doing the podcast. Love to know what you think. Obviously, we'll put out the topic clips coming up on social media as well as YouTube, but drop a comment below. You can always hit me on Instagram at Jess from the Northwest. We'll see you next time.